Santa Barbara today, a special hearing where it's June 22nd and it's 9 o'clock and we're again at the Santa Barbara Building Center. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Contreras, would you give us the TV announcement?
Thank you. The special hearing of June 22nd, 2006 will be televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, Channel 20, at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of the special hearing will be on Saturday, June 24th, 2006, and Sunday, June 25th, 2006 at 5 p.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. For the roll call, Commissioner Boyson,
Here.
Commissioner Brown,
Here.
Commissioner Cooney,
Here.
Commissioner Montgomery,
Here.
Commissioner Valencia.
Here. Thank you. This is a time for public comment. This is a special meeting today. If anybody has anything that's not on today's agenda, would they like to come up and speak now? Commissioner Boyson, is there anybody, any slips in the box? It looks like nobody's here to speak on special items. All right, we'll go to Planning and Development Divisional Briefings. Ms. Meester?
Mr. Chair, actually, there's an item on before that I spoke to you about, and that is consideration of appointment of a new Planning Commission Secretary
All
for
right.
the Planning Commission. And I think Ron and I raised this issue with the Commission in a very awkward way last week over the phone because the board was in budget hearings, but wanted to kind of give you a heads up. So I was hoping that the Planning Commission would act on that today.
All right, we accept the nomination of Ms. Meester as our new secretary. Could we have a motion to that effect?
I would move to nominate Ms. Meester for the recording secretary of the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Brown, thank you.
No, it's the secretary.
Yeah, not the recording
Oh, it's
secretary. I'm not going to do
sorry.
Cynthia's job.
Excuse me, the secretary. I
All right.
apologize.
And I
Approved as-
wholeheartedly second it.
And nor could you.
No, I'm sure I couldn't.
All right, and with that, Ms. Contreras, would you call the record?
Commissioner Boyson,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Montgomery,
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia.
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. And we'd like to thank Mr. Chase for doing the job so well for a year and a half or whatever.
Mr. Chair, I made that same comment about both Zoraida and Steve yesterday at the Montecito Planning Commission. I think they've done a tremendous job of serving both commissions, and hope that they'll have a little bit of time to do other things because it is a big commitment. There are a couple of other things I wanted to report on, Mr. Chair, even though there isn't a director's report, and then I'll turn
right.
this over to Ron Cortez, and then Mike Zimmer has a briefing he'd like to give on the building code
Okay.
update. In terms of the director's report, I'll be brief. Last week, the board was in budget hearings, as you probably know, and there were several items that the board discussed with respect to our department. We came out, I would say, very well. Our budget was approved as submitted, and as to I think 3 items that the board considered on behalf of the department, we received 2 of them. One of them directly affecting the Planning Commission. That was the Planning Commission compensation. The board did include as part of the budget reimbursement for mileage to meetings that the commissioners attend on behalf of the county, as well as $50 pay for subcommittee meetings and a $50 increase for Planning Commission meeting compensation. So that, I think, will be phased in. The mileage begins July 1st, and the meeting compensation begins at the beginning of 2007, as your commission had requested that it be structured. So that occurred. The second item that the board approved was an increase in the department's budget to have staff available on the weekends for zoning enforcement and permit compliance issues. So that it will be a program that we will offer county-wide, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how we'll make that work. Our intent is not to act upon sort of normal zoning enforcement or permit compliance issues, but things that are timely. So if somebody's constructing on the weekends and they're not supposed to according to their conditions, we would obviously respond to that. If somebody were out in the field destroying a resource that they were not supposed to be doing, we'd respond to that. But if they're just filing a new complaint or about somebody occupying a building residentially or something like that, we would wait until normal working hours. But it'll provide us some ability to respond on the weekends to things that really are timely. So that occurred.
Commissioner Braun has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Diane, does that mean that there'll be a person at the end of a phone that someone can call?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, what we'll be doing, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, is we'll have a cell phone that will be assigned to somebody or maybe several somebodies. They'll be on standby during the normal working hours of the weekend, so probably 8 to 5 on the weekends, and we'll be available during that time frame to take calls and then make a judgment as to whether or not they should go out and visit a site.
Commissioner Boyson.
So I assume this will be on the recorded message that you
Yes.
get when you call the county
Right.
building department?
When you call the building or the
After
main
hours.
planning number. Mhm.
Will this be available strictly on the weekends during quote-unquote normal business hours, or is it available in the evening?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Boyson, the way that the board structured it, it's to augment normal working hours on the weekends.
Okay.
So it's not after hours in the evenings, although people do know who they can get a hold of in this county, it seems. So, I've gotten calls before, as have many of the other deputies and building building supervisors.
I'll be curious to see
How many calls we get.
how many calls we get and whether this works. And
Right.
I know we had a situation in North County where an alarm went off, and in a cooling operation, they couldn't get a hold of anybody in planning and development. They actually called a couple of planning commissioners and things like that. But now that was during the week, before hours. So I'll be curious to see if it works on the weekends and whether or not we want to implement something like this and have it available morning hours and early evening, that sort of thing.
Right.
Later on.
Well, we'll certainly keep track of the level of activity, and we will make sure people are available
Commissioner Braun.
during the hours that we indicate they will be.
I do know that people working on weekends is a problem in some neighborhoods. I hear that from my neighbors, that they're doing this construction, that construction, so that may be one of the most highly used process or function.
Commissioner Brown, you look directly at me as a general contractor when you said that.
Yes.
Okay, and then the last item that the board considered was a request from the Historic Landmarks Advisory Commission to obtain $10,000 for survey work, and the board placed that on their October list of items to be considered. So I think that was all that the board did with respect to the department in terms of the budget. So I think I would find it was quite a successful budget process, and I think we're in good shape.
Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I was catching up with the board's action by viewing the recorded version after I returned, and I saw the discussion of the planning commissioner compensation issue last night. Two particular remarks stood out in my mind, and I think bear mention here. First of all, I should mention Mr. Cortez, in an attempt to clarify the request, which was a little lost in the shuffle, made a valiant effort to not only bring it to some concise conclusion, but also, I think, defended the purpose of the request in the first place, which was not to benefit anybody here, but the Planning Commission as an institution and its importance. In that regard, I was disappointed to hear a comment by Supervisor Gray that the request was outrageous. She used that word, and it's stuck in my craw all night. The request may not have been prudent, it may have been untimely, but it certainly wasn't outrageous. And I quarrel with that remark. She indicates that she explained that to her commissioner, Commissioner Valencia, but Commissioner Valencia indicated several months ago when we started this process that she was in conceptual support of it. So I was very disappointed at that reaction. She was the only one to vote against it. With regard to the mileage, Supervisor Centeno, who supported an increase in compensation, said he didn't want the commissioners to be going out multiple times to visit sites. And it suggests to me that he has a very incomplete understanding of the time commitments called upon for commissioners to think that we would waste time going to multiple sites in order to obtain mileage reimbursement. And it wasn't funny. I think it indicated to me that we need to do a better job of communicating with the supervisors about exactly what we do and how much time it takes.
Thank you. Commissioner Montgomery.
I don't want to go too far because as of the end of June, I will be history on this planning commission. I'm very disappointed in the behavior of the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I think she was on the right path a few weeks ago when she suggested it was time to look at the burden on the planning commission and perhaps find a 21st century version of the 19th century planning commission that we have. And if you really stop and think of what it takes to talk people into taking these essentially volunteer jobs, that kind of behavior is just totally going in the wrong direction. And I would ask her to consider an apology to our chairman, whom I worked very hard for last year to set up the possibility of a fair increase, and to this commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Montgomery and Cooney. And I watched it too, and the comments were a little harsh. However, I have to try to remember that in defense of the Board of Supervisors, they do have about 20 boards and commissions that they look after. And sometimes there's a lot of people pulling at them. In addition to that, it was the budget hearing, and on every item, there were people standing up and challenging each of their individual thoughts, you know. And at some points, people are human and they react a little different. And it's easy to look at and say negative items, you know, negative things about things. But if you're there under the heat, sometimes you get a little excited about it and you just want to move on. I noticed that our item took a few minutes, and then the rest was like a consent item. Our item was a $50 item, and the next was an $800,000 item, which became a consent item. So I suspect there was a lot of emotional thrust at that time. Yes, Mr. Cortez.
Chairman Valencia and members of the commission, of course, it's not my position to clarify anyone's comments on the board. They were certainly their own, but I would like to maybe just put it in context in the fact that the board had been meeting for a number of days and overlooking, you know, really thousands of proposals and numbers, and that was Friday was a very condensed schedule in which they were looking through a number of different proposals, and it was confusing. Everyone was sort of confused about what was going on, and that it's sort of the context of what was happening at the time that should be taken into consideration as well. And I know that the board on several occasions have complimented, you know, the Planning Commission and their work. Thanks.
Thank you. And in respect to more than one visit to a site, that does happen at times. I remember the preserve at San Marcos. I must have made easy 6 visits, and I remember seeing Commissioner Boyson there on several of them, you know, at least on 2 of them. I only put in for compensation for 1 or possibly 2, picked up the rest myself, because some I had to walk the preserve, there were additional comments by the people involved and didn't feel that it was right to put in. But many of us have absorbed many times the cost of these site visits. In many cases, especially in my district, I do 2 or 3 site visits to check the traffic in the mornings. I do the site visit in the afternoon, I only put in one time. And so I absorb all the others, but I am familiar with what is going on in that site. Yes, Ms. Meester.
I was going to move to another topic.
All right? Probably the thing to do.
Okay. Just one other item I wanted to do was to just quickly go over a couple of upcoming meetings, because there is a new item on this schedule, and I want to make sure this worked for the Planning Commission.
All right.
Well, just to note, June 28th is going to be, likely be a fairly long day, depending on how long the Rancho San Marcos golf course item goes. But you can see you've got 5.5 hours. It's in the North County. The new item is on July 14th, and that is Friday. So I don't know if that's an acceptable day for people or not. It's proposed to be a special site visit to the Santa Barbara Ranch property with the Central BAR. And we have been working with 2 members of the Central BAR in reviewing some visual information and determining which lots and which houses should have story poles erected to facilitate in that site visit. So the BAR is actually going to meet on the Santa Barbara Ranch proposal on June 30th and get an overview of the material they'll be reviewing and confirm the story pole locations and probably some details on the site visit. But I think it would be really beneficial for both the BAR and the Planning Commission to jointly visit this site.
And during the visit, it would be nice if you would give us maps again that's showing all
Sure.
the, all right. Everybody like to speak on this, Commissioner Montgomery.
On the San Marcos project, would it be possible to have a time certain, either the first item or at 1 o'clock?
It is a
A
time.
lot of, it is on the
Yes.
time
Mr.
certain?
Chair, it is, and Commissioner Montgomery, it's time certain at 1 o'clock.
Oh, perfect, because many people from the South Coast who use the golf course, I know, would like to be
Right,
present. Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
So
Uh,
does the
Commissioner.
July 14th date work for the Planning Commission?
That sounds good to me.
Mr. Boyce?
I was just going to say that the morning would be more convenient for me than the afternoon on
Okay.
that July 14th meeting.
Maybe we can plan on 9 or 9:30 or something like that.
That would be great.
So,
All right, fine. And Commissioner Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Meester, is, since this is going to be, I guess, the public site visit, will there be public allowed?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, whenever the commission meets, the public
Yeah.
is welcome to come. I think that the project applicant is also going to set up opportunities for the public to go out to the site separate from the Planning Commission if people can't make it. So they certainly can come on July 14th, if that's the date we ultimately stick with.
So there'll be
Um,
some sort of public notice or
Oh,
some
sure.
other? Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you.
And you probably recommend certain type of walking shoes for people. I mean, there's snakes out there and kind of things, aren't they?
Mr. Chair, I've never seen a snake out there.
Never seen a snake.
But that doesn't mean they aren't there. You can drive to most all of the sites. So I would suggest, yeah, you should wear comfortable shoes you can walk in, but we're not going to be hiking all over the property. We'll
Okay.
be driving,
All right, thank you.
okay? And then the other special hearing that's on your agenda that I think was on last time is Thursday, September 7th, to consider the zoning ordinance reformatting project with the Montecito PC. So we're still hopeful that that date will work.
All right, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Brown?
Is that week, Labor Day week?
Probably.
I'm
Yes,
just-
I think it is.
Um,
It's the Thursday, so.
Yeah, I just was wondering, considering that we didn't seem to take a lot of, I don't think we used the amount of time that we had agendized last time. I'm wondering, I see agendized for 6 hours. Do you really think it's going to take 6 hours?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I think the workshop showed that we've been doing a pretty good job of addressing public
Yes.
concerns. And so I don't expect to get a lot of substantive public
Right.
concerns. I'm hopeful that we're
Okay.
getting them and resolving those as we go along, and that seems to be the case. But you never know what's going to happen when push comes to shove.
Well, is there any reason why that it couldn't be just on a normal hearing date?
It's possible. I mean, we can see how September 6th is shaping up as we get
Right.
closer.
Okay.
And I can talk to the Montecito Planning Commission
And see
about that, and see if
that's-
that would
rather
work
than
for
have
them.
another hearing day and
Sure.
use additional
All right.
funds. Thank you.
Does that conclude and you're ready for Mr. Zimmer?
I think so.
Before we go to Mr. Zimmer, we received a letter from Commissioner Montgomery. Commissioner Montgomery, would you like to expand on your letter submitted to the Board of Supervisors?
No, I think that it speaks for itself, as have most of the remarks I've made the last year and a half, and why don't we give everybody a little victory lap and a little sigh of relief, and we move on. Thank you very much for the opportunity, though, and serving under you.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Zimmer, the building official from Santa Barbara County.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the commission. Can you hear me?
Bring it a little closer to you.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the commission. Today I'm here before you to give you a presentation on the update of our model codes that I will be putting forth before the Board of Supervisors next month. And hopefully you've already received your copy and had an opportunity to at least read through it and try to understand what we're doing here. And most importantly, I think it's important that I brief you so that you understand that hopefully this will not have too much of an effect on any planning issues as to they relate to building construction. Okay. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to take any of your questions. Basically, we're looking at adopting 3 major portions in the model codes. One is the 2004 California Electrical Code. We're also doing some state updates for the engineering. And most importantly, for our local, we're updating all our high fire requirements for exterior construction. So what that will entail is that we're giving more, we're giving more latitude to the community as to what materials they can use to protect their houses in high fire areas that we hope will also coincide with proper planning. So that if there's any issues that come up, there's a lot of latitude they have for using specific types of materials that we hope will not affect any of the exteriors of the buildings that may have an effect on planning.
All right.
So, with that, if you have any questions.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zimmer, couple questions.
Mhm.
Once this is adopted by the county, how does the adoption affect applicants who are already in the process?
It won't. Once this becomes adopted, it will only affect applicants who apply after the adoption date.
And the other question I had was you'd indicated that you had, I guess, sent this document to stakeholder groups, and I was just wondering what groups you might have sent it to, and did you not get any response from them?
I've had one response so far, but I've sent it to the Santa Barbara Contractors Association, Santa Barbara Association of AIA, Santa Maria Valley Contractors Association. Just last week, I met with the local engineers, CELOC, and we've also sent copies to the Northern Engineer Organization, and have only had one comment, actually, and that was on our grading issue, which we were able to answer for them.
Thank you.
Is this the normal California UBC code that we basically follow?
Yes, but this is going to be the last time we adopt California building codes.
Okay.
The United States is moving towards what they call the ICC, which is the International Code Council, so that all model codes will be uniform throughout the United States.
I see. All right, thank you. Any further questions? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. I couldn't let the moment pass without asking you to elaborate just a bit on the high fire area changes, because living in that category and living with the concern about fire, just in general, what changes are being made to hopefully reduce the exposure of new buildings to the constant risk of fire in the foothills?
Okay, in most cases, in the past, we have allowed wood construction with basically an underlayment of drywall as part of the protection for the exterior structure. Now what we're doing is we're moving closer to what we call the internet, it'll eventually be the interface wildland code, which will be coming out as part of the international codes. We're trying to get in line with them by making all exterior coverings meet a 1-hour fire protection. So it doesn't matter if it's wood, stucco, or whatever types of material, it must meet a certain standard in order for them to be able to use that in a high fire area, which is a minimum 1-hour protection. We've also reduced some of the venting and have recoordinated some of the venting that's used in roofs as we've learned over the years to help eliminate fire from drafting through roof areas uncontrollably.
And I see you have fire sprinklers not as mandatory, but as an option, which can be used if different types of building materials and construction are employed.
Right, that's correct. However, that will not affect what the fire department has an automatic requirement of fire sprinklers if your structure is 5,000 square feet or greater.
Thanks.
Commissioner Montgomery.
Most of the proposed changes appear to me to look ahead. What do we do about all of the existing dwellings that would be out of compliance? Is there some program over 10, 15, 20 years where you gradually get rid of shingle roofs and other problem materials?
Commissioner Montgomery, if you have an existing structure that was built and it was in compliance with the codes at the time it was built, there would be no retroactive changes that would be required. So this is not an attempt to bring existing buildings into a new compliance. This is a new code for any new buildings under construction. And any existing buildings that have additions put on them or any remodel work would now have to comply with this new code. But if they're already in existence, then this would have no effect on them.
All right, thank you very much. Any further questions? If not, thank you very much, Mrs. Zimmer, for coming in. All right, and with that, we'll go on to the consent item procedure. Our first item, are we prepared for our first item, or do we need a short break? Let's take a short 2-minute break to set up. Please.
Thank you. The following is a hearing on the request of Jeff Havlick, real property agent for Public Works, to consider case number 06-GOV-15 for a determination that the vacation of an unimproved and unused portion of county right-of-way near Ballard Canyon Road is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara.
All right, thank you. Any ex parte or site visits? All right, if not, Mr. Tetley? Mr. Tetley?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. P&D has analyzed this proposal from Public Works to vacate a portion of public right-of-way, which is designed to unencumber a property owner in preparation of sale. The portion of right-of-way is unused and unbuilt, and we recommend to your commission that you determine the project consistent with the comprehensive plan as required by Section 65402 and transmit the report to the Board of Supervisors and Public Works. And I'm here for any questions. I understand Mr. Heil from Public Works is available for questions as well.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions? If not, Ms. Lutsky, do we open the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, that would be appropriate.
All right, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on the subject? Seeing no one rise, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to Planning Commission, to staff. Any comments? If not, this is a 3rd District item. Commissioner Montgomery.
Yes, I move that we support the recommendation that the Planning Commission determine that the proposed road vacation is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and we transmit the consistency report required by Government Code Section 64402C to Jeff Havlick, Public Works, Real Property, and the Board of Supervisors. This memorandum dated June 12, 2006, and the letter reflecting the Planning Commission's action shall constitute the required report.
All right, thank you very much. With that, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyson. All right, Ms. Contreras, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Montgomery?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Tetley. The next item is the Public Works Road Vacation. Mr. Tetley, you're up again. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sean-
We have to read that into the record. Ms. Contreras?
Thank you. The following is a hearing on the request of, getting lost, excuse me. The following is a request of Jeff Havlick, real property agent, Public Works, to consider case number 06-GOV-18 for termination of the vacation of an unincorporated, unimproved, and unused portion of the county right-of-way over portions of Cuesta Street, Olivet Avenue, and a 20-foot wide alleyway is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Boyson?
Yes, just as ex parte, I did a site, a fairly extensive site visit. I discussed this request with Mr. Cross this morning of Harold Fletcher and Associates and Fletcher Cross and Associates, and I also discussed this with Mr. Heil, primarily discussing the concept of only doing selective vacations or abandonments and not including all of them, and realize that this is a policy that probably needs to continue in the County of Santa Barbara, as certain people are just not willing to take part of the responsibility as far as cost or for whatever reason. So.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, any ex parte or site visits by other members? Commissioner Cooney?
I would have, Mr. Chair, but I didn't want to overdo the mileage reimbursement.
Thank you very much. All right, well, with that, we'll go to the, we'll open the public hearing. Do we have anybody who'd like to speak on this? Seeing no one rise, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to staff and bring it back to the Planning Commission. I have one question. On the map, I noticed that there's some proposed areas, and I'm just wondering, like Commissioner Brown prior to the meeting asked me about these things, is there any, why don't we have some type of a plan in motion to do all the properties at one time, like quarterly or something of that nature, looking at the map that you supplied as attachment A? Mr. Tetley? Or Ms. Meeks?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I would defer to Public Works on their plans, if they have any, to do, as you say, maybe a regional analysis of quit claiming areas which are obviously not going to be used, and maybe that would help to alleviate some of the concerns that Commissioner Boyson talked about, where we have piecemeal projects and remainder islands of right-of-way, instead of maximizing the public benefit of looking at it on a broader scale. But the maps were supplied by Public Works through the applicant. So I have no comment on the adequacy of those maps, but I do understand that they do accurately reflect the proposal that's before you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll go to Public Works.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Yeah, this is an issue that Public Works has kind of struggled with, and you know, the dilemma that we're in is that these road vacations are completely paid for with the funds from homeowners and applicants that want the right-of-way vacated on their properties, and currently there doesn't seem to be any funding within the county to pay for road vacations on behalf of the general public by the county, and for the county to pick up all those costs. The costs do frequently run into the many thousands of dollars to do it. We go through at least 20 steps to make sure that we comply with the Streets and Highways Code. You got to contact the utility companies to make sure that if they have any in-place public utilities, that you reserve easements for them. You look at drainage, maintenance issues. There's surveying costs, and so currently right now there's no money in the county to do it. So the position we're in is that we have road vacation applicants, private property owners approach the county to request these road vacations, and you know, the Public Works would preferably like to get rid of all the right of way in this instance, for example, but you know, the dilemma that we're in is that if you have some property owners that pay $1,000 to $3,000 to have the right of way vacated on their property. Mm-hmm. Then you have other property owners who haven't paid anything, and you know, there'd be an outcry from the property owners that paid those significant costs, that their neighbor is getting the right of way vacated from their property for nothing, and they're having to pay $1,000 or $3,000. And you know, we'd probably find ourselves in the position where some of the owners would contact the county and say, hey, you know what, I want a refund from my funds. I want my right of way vacated too. And of course, if that happened, then the funding that initially started the project would all dry up, and then you wouldn't have a project anymore.
So what happens when when they vacate and now they have the use of that property, they can use that frontage, 10 feet or something, they put grass in there, and a neighbor sees it and he hasn't had his, and he just goes into it and puts lawn in there. Do we do anything about that?
Mr. Chair, Brett Stewart from Public Works. That would technically be an encroachment, a violation. I can't say that there's complete enforcement on that, but there is some enforcement. You know, we depend on neighbors to report that, and that would be followed up on. To follow up on what Harrison was saying, this was actually our first attempt to do more of a comprehensive abandonment with the help of Mr. Cross's office. Harrison and I started working on a small abandonment at the request of one property owner, and the property owner was actually represented by Mr. Cross's firm. And so when we started looking at it, we said, you know, they said, you know, there's probably a lot of property owners along here that might be interested. And so we said that's probably a good idea, and they kind of handled the coordination of it. Our typical thing is just doing one piece or a couple pieces at a time when a property owner comes in, because they have to pay for real property's time, as Harrison said. But so this is the result of our first comprehensive try, and we got, you know, quite a few chunks, but again, you're still going to have some chunks out there. And our hope is that once people see people being able to expand their yard and put a fence out there and whatever they might do, they'll be more inclined to come in and request their own abandonment, which then we could process for them.
Mr. Stewart, I can see that if somebody has to all of a sudden come up with $3,000 and say these are people of modest income.
It's hard for some people.
It's hard.
Right.
But is there like improvements, or is there a 5-year, 7-year, or 10-year improvement plan where they can make payments to pay for this and it would benefit the county?
We haven't discussed that. I suppose that would be an option to look at it at some point. You know, if we'd have to work within the real property budget and make sure that paid for their time, you know, somehow. But
and many times cities where you have alleys and they want to do improvements and they're still in dirt and they want to pave them, they give the opportunity of the people to pay over a 7-year period.
Right.
And
you know, I think that would be more of an option if they're paying for the property. In the case of, I don't want to get overly complicated, but if it's owned by the county in fee, they actually have to pay a price for the property in addition to Harrison's time. And that would certainly be an option when they're paying for the property of 7 years or so. But when they're paying just for Harrison's time, that's the only time they pay for, is the processing, his staff time on his time card. That is the total fee. That would be hard, I think, to spread over 7 years and make their budget work. So we could talk about it, but that might be a harder one to do.
Commissioner Cooney.
You just raised the issue I was going to address, and that has to do with those instances where a property owner approaches the county to vacate a public road where there's obvious benefit to the landowner in terms of being able to develop the property that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And we had a situation here involving the Jesucita Trail where it was disclosed to us that there was compensation coming to the county from the landowner as a result of the vacation process. So how is it that a decision is made to charge in some instances, that is, to value the property and sell it, in effect, as opposed to merely vacating and covering your costs?
Basically, it's purely, Commissioner Cooney, sorry. It's basically strictly determined on whether that property is fee-owned, meaning the county actually owns the parcel of land that is that road right-of-way, or if it's just an easement over another underlying property. Most of the county road rights-of-way are just easements over an already, underlying property owner. So all we're doing is saying, this is excess, we don't need it for road purposes, and we give it back to the property owner. In other cases, there's actually a strip of land there that the county owns the property, the whole thing, and we own the dirt. And so in that case, state law requires us, because it's a public asset, to get an appraisal on it, and it'd be a gift of public funds if we gave it away. So it has to be appraised and a fair value obtained for it. So that's our only, the only things we look at are whether it's truly excessive right-of-way, and in a lot of cases, these are just excess widths of weed area that we get a fire notice on every year, and it's a win for the county also to get rid of it, so we don't have to do weed abatement and stuff, and it also beautifies the area if they landscape it and everything. So that's basically the criteria. Sometimes it does create a parcel that could then be split, or a bigger addition could be put on, and that would be, up to the commission at that point when they came in for a lot split, or whatever process would be involved with that.
Mr. Chair, if I could just
Yes,
follow up with
please.
one additional question. There is nothing in the law that prevents you from acquiring compensation if you release your easement, though, is there? In other words, right now, by policy, you choose to sell or must value and arrive at a sale price if you're selling a fee, but a property right is valuable, and for many property owners, it makes a big difference to release your easement. So I suppose the county could, and if you wanted to develop a fund to utilize to acquire other areas, you might want to consider going beyond the simple reimbursement and having some kind of fee paid by homeowners who apply for release of easement as well. I'm just throwing that out. County Council may have input, but it seems to me it's not necessarily the case that because it's only an easement, it's not valuable to the homeowner or property owner.
Yes, Commissioner Cooney, it's a good question, and it's an issue that real property is examined with County Council, and there's a lot of legal precedents and a lot of law that goes into this this decision, but the policy that we're currently acting on comes from a County Council opinion that was issued that cited certain legal precedents and cases in which the fee, we had to sell the fee, and easements, we didn't sell the easements. So that's what we're working on, is a legal interpretation from County Council.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Montgomery.
Yeah, not to
Come on, sir.
micromanage the process, and it sounds to me like you're stepping your way into it in a constructive way. I see little difference in value between a perpetual easement and fee. In the real world, if you had your actuaries or whoever does that, they'll come out pretty close to being the same. I think it's important that there be a fairly fixed formula as to how you determine the value either of the right-of-way or of the fee. And once you have that, perhaps you could just have a simple one-page little letter that then goes to the other owners that have similar situations, and at least people know what's there. I commend you for moving in this direction.
Commissioner Boyson.
And Mr. Chair, not to prolong the agony of this item, but your comments actually have sparked one of my soapbox items, and that being the idea of, you know, perhaps if there were some sort of extended payment, that more of these neighbors would have been involved in this. As you know, I've long been a proponent of the County of Santa Barbara being more receptive to the idea of customer service districts, especially when it comes to new developments such as subdivisions, where perhaps we can obviate the need for a homeowner association through the use of a customer service district. But in a case like this would be another example of where the individuals might be able to utilize the option of paying a small amount with their property taxes each year over a 7 or 10 year period, and would be more receptive towards joining in on this process. But so I'm off my soapbox. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And with that, this is the third I'm sorry. We'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on that? Close the public hearing, and we'll come back. This is the third district item. Commissioner Montgomery?
Yes, I move that we adopt the staff recommendations.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyson. Ms. Contreras, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Montgomery?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. And with that, we'll take a short little break to set up for item number 1. Planning Commission come to order. We're going to take an item out of order because the first item is set for a time certain. So we're going to go to item number 2, the flood control easement. Ms. Contreras, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you. The following is a hearing on the request of Tom Fayram, Deputy Director of the County of Santa Barbara Flood Control District Public Works, to consider case number 06-GOV-14 for determination that the County Flood Control District's acquisition of an easement for the placement of fill material is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara.
All right, thank you. Do we have any site visits or anything of any nature here? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is in my neighborhood. I've been by the site hundreds of times, but I I took the opportunity of this matter coming before us to actually drive up to and more closely examine the proposed deposit site.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Goulet, is it Goulet or Gillette?
Gillette, Mr. Chair.
Gillette, thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, good morning. My name is Dan Gullett, planner in Development Review South. I have a 65402 determination today for a flood control easement acquisition. This presentation will cover background, the easement location, purpose, and extent, policy consistency issues, and then conclude with staff recommendations. As part of its maintenance program, the County Flood Control District routinely removes sediment material from debris basins and flood control channels that reduce flow capacity. This maintenance occurs on an as-needed basis, but is especially necessary after severe storm events and wildfires. It has recently been the practice of the Flood Control District to place some of this fill material on easements obtained from private landowners for this purpose. This 65402 determination is for the acquisition of a flood control easement that would allow for placement of fill material recovered from flood control maintenance projects. Fill material from flood control projects has been placed on the subject parcel on 2 separate occasions in the past. In both 1995 and 1998, emergency permits were issued on this parcel, allowing the placement of a total of 6,000 cubic yards of material removed from flood control activities. Government Code Section 65402C requires the planning agency to consider the location, purpose, and extent of the proposed easement for consistency with the comprehensive plan. I would like to note that the planning agency does not have the ability to condition a 65402 determination. Along with other elements of the comprehensive plan, because of its location, the Toro Canyon plan also applies to the subject parcel. The project site is located at the intersection of East Valley Road and Toro Canyon Road. It is currently vacant and zoned residential. The approximate area of the proposed easement is shaded in yellow on this slide. A 10-foot wide trail easement was dedicated to the county along the entire width of the parcel adjacent to the East Valley Road right-of-way. The County Parks Department acknowledged that this trail easement is not yet improved or in use. The green shading is environmentally sensitive habitat as designated in the Toro Canyon plan. The required setback from the coast live oak riparian forest, environmentally sensitive habitat, opposite Toro Canyon Road is 50 feet. That ESH area is on this side of the easement. The other designated environmentally sensitive habitat is wetlands on the adjacent parcel to the west. The required setback for the designated wetland area is 100 feet. Although the proposed easement area on the map included with the 65402 application does not avoid the trail easement or ESH buffer, flood control staff has assured that the ESH buffer and trail easement would be avoided during any stockpiling operations. The following 2 slides are images of the site taken on June 7th. This composite photo was taken from East Valley Road right-of-way at the southwest corner of the parcel. This photo was taken northwest of the parcel from Toro Canyon Road. This image shows the proximity of the proposed easement to the watercourses in the area. The easement would be beneath the star in this image. As currently proposed, the easement would include the entire area of the subject parcel. APN 155120061, known as 2970 East Valley Road. The purpose of the easement would be to allow the deposition of fill material removed from flood control debris basins, channels, and water courses. The easement would be used only for placement of fill. The amount of fill material to be deposited on the easement would be dependent on weather events and the availability of alternative sites. That quantity is unknown at this time. The key policy considerations in this case are those policies protecting visual resources, grading policies, biological habitat protection, recreation, and noise. The following slides summarize the applicable policies and development standards. Because of its location, topography, and lack of vegetative cover, the subject parcel is visually prominent from both East Valley Road and Toro Canyon Road. If visual impacts of the grading activity associated with the proposed easement are minimized with mitigations, such as appropriate landscaping, fill minimization, and fill dispersal, then the acceptance of the proposed easement would be consistent with these policies and development standards. Additionally, the land use element contains policies promoting minimization of grading and protection of natural landforms. Staff acknowledges that sediment material removed from flood control elements and watercourses must be deposited at some location. Depending on the quantity of fill material and the matter in which it's placed, the acceptance of the proposed easement is potentially consistent with these grading policies. As mentioned previously, a designated Southern Coast Live Oak riparian forest environmentally sensitive habitat is located opposite Toro Canyon Road. The subject parcel contains a portion of the required 50-foot setback from that ESH. Also, a designated wetland is located on the parcel immediately west of the subject parcel. The Toro Canyon plan requires a 100-foot setback from that wetland. Although the easement includes these ESH buffer areas, flood control staff stated that grading activities would not take place inside these buffer areas. As long as the activity associated with fill placement on the proposed easement avoids disturbance to the ESH and ESH buffer areas, the acquisition of the proposed easement would be consistent with these policies and development standards. A 10-foot wide trail easement is located immediately adjacent to East Valley Road right-of-way. Condition 2 of the parcel map that created the subject parcel restricted all encroachments within this dedicated easement, which would inhibit the safe use of the trail. The trail easement is not yet improved or in use. If the flood control easement is required, heavy equipment would likely cross the easement over the existing driveway which crosses the trail easement. The proposed flood control easement would be consistent with this policy and development standard if trail use is not established during its lifetime and if appropriate mitigation measures are employed, such as landscaping. The Toro Canyon plan includes time limitations on construction activities near residential receptors. The parcel map which created this parcel also contained a condition limiting the timing of the activity. If the most restrictive time limits were placed on construction activities allowed within the proposed easement, and if construction equipment was maintained properly, the acquisition of the proposed easement would be consistent with this policy and development standard. In conclusion, pursuant to Government Code Section 65402C, staff recommends that your commission determines that the acquisition of the flood control easement is potentially consistent with a comprehensive plan and transmits the consistency report required by Government Code Section 65402C to the County Flood Control District and the Board of Directors of the County Flood Control District. The staff report and the letter reflecting the Planning Commission's action would constitute that required report. That concludes staff's presentation.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I see that Ms. Spencer from Flood Control is here, so I have a question for her. Mr. Gullett indicated that grading will occur near the ESHAs, but it'll stay outside of the setbacks. How do they know where these setbacks are? I mean, when they're out there grading, I mean, do you go out and inspect? Or what kind of assurances that these ESHAs are in fact protected?
Good, Commissioner Brown. Basically what happens in emergency situations and also routine maintenance is both myself and other flood control personnel are out at these sites. We could easily flag these areas and keep people out of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cooney?
I have a question for flood control as well. Although, Mr. Gullett, you should feel free to chime in. It looks to me that the prior use of this particular parcel for the deposit of flood materials has actually changed the landform already. I noticed that twice emergency permits were used. But in the second instance, at least, a land use permit was issued to allow the material to remain in place. And what it looks like to me from the corner of East Valley and Toro Canyon, there's actually been an increase in the elevation of the property, which is creating a wall-like feature at that corner. So someone approaching that looks at this substantial deposit of former fill. Is that an accurate perception? Is it actually building up what was the natural altitude of the land at that corner? Anybody?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, that is correct. The land use permit, which allowed the temporary fill placement authorized by the emergency permit, did change the natural contours on this parcel. And what you see in terms of grading that was done previously on that parcel is permitted, and that is what was done with those emergency permits. Yeah, it is still there.
Well, it looks, there are two different issues. One is the sort of buildup of the overall land over time, and the second is the stockpiling of boulders. There have been boulders on that parcel as long as I can remember, which are utilized, I think, by the landowner in other projects. But neither one is really consistent, in my view, with the Toro Canyon plan visual policies. I just, for those commissioners who haven't had a chance to go by there, it's an extremely well-used rural area. It's a in constant use by bikers and people who aren't in a big rush to get where they're going. For many, many decades, this land was a pasture land for an adjacent dairy, which was renowned throughout Southern California. It's very pastoral, very beautiful, and my concern, I will just flag early on, is that if we allow this to continue, what's going to happen is we're going to have a built-up corner of that property, which looks like the parcels in Carpinteria that we reviewed recently, where we're actually dramatically changing the landform. Instead of a gentle slope down to East Valley Road, we're going to have an abrupt increase in altitude. So while that lot might become level and not sloping and may be beneficial to the owners of the land, it's going to very drastically alter the visual appearance. So I'm having trouble finding even a potential consistency based on what's occurred up to now.
Thank you. Commissioner Montgomery.
I'm not even going to be as gentle as Commissioner Cooney. I think this is a disaster. I've driven by this property literally 1,000 times when I lived in Carpinteria and would drive up this way to play my occasional, then many games of golf, and now it's drifted down to once a year. This is the visually most important part of East Valley Road that isn't that's exposed. It looks like an abandoned farm in Appalachia, and I think this is just not in keeping with the area. I think it will affect property values. I think that if we can protect the Gaviota Coast and other important highways, this is a very important gateway into the most valuable real estate on which the county's revenues depend that we have. And I'd like to see some really good landscape plan that beautifies what has been an ugly eyesore for ever since in the 20 or 30 years that I've lived here. I also am planning to move back to the area, so I'll be driving by it a lot again. I just can't, I don't know what we're doing here. We have a chance to make something really attractive, and we're leaving it, again, like an abandoned farm in Appalachia.
Commissioner Boyson.
What are the alternatives, Ms. Spencer, if this land were not used for? Do we have other sites in the area that could be used, or?
Commissioner Boyson, This is just one of many possibilities that the flood control district uses. We often, in emergency situations, we are simply scrambling for sites to put our debris basin material in. And as an example, in 1995, we had debris basins fill twice. And sometimes we can get contractors to take them, but it dries up the cost. The further we have to haul this material, the more expensive it is for everybody involved. So it's a cost savings situation for us if we don't have to go as far. We scramble each time. And so the more places we have, the better situation it is for us, especially under emergency situations.
And would this be strictly on an emergency situation that this would be used?
No, this site could be used for routine maintenance. In routine maintenance, we have the ability to clean out debris basins once they're 25% full. And we also run into the same problems with getting rid of material. So it could be routine maintenance as well as emergency situations.
And do you have sites that are designated strictly for emergency situations?
We
or-
have some easements over some properties, but we are always looking for new stockpile sites because we always run out.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is there a maximum amount of debris that you can put on there, or will you continually put on forever?
Mr. Chair, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
We have not quantified, I was reading over the staff report, and we have not quantified the cubic yards that would go on this parcel. I don't know if that is I'm sure that is something that we could quantify if there was some guidelines that you wanted us to follow.
All right. And the other, is there a time this easement would continue forever for?
The nature of the debris basin cleanout world is that we can go many, many years without having to clean them out, and then we can have to clean them out twice in a year. And so, yes, to answer your question, it would be ongoing until that site was not appropriate to put any more material on.
And the third and final question is, Mr. Pozan, is he receiving any compensation for granting us this use?
I do not know the answer to that question.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Spencer, why is it that when they place the material in here that they end up grading the site so it's just flat like a plateau? Why is there not, I appreciate it's probably easier and less, more cost effective, but why is there not sort of more contouring or some consideration to take into the concerns that Commissioner Cooney has brought forth?
I think that the reason that the grading occurs is it just becomes a more stable site once you start to grade it out and recontour, versus it's just in terms of being able to bring material into the site. Once you start piling stuff, you can't get trucks and such in there. You need to have it a controlled situation so you can continue to pull trucks into the site, dump them and grade it out and get it ready for the next go-around.
So then you end up with a site that has this plateau that's considerably elevated from the adjacent roadways or adjacent properties, and it looks very strange. I understand that the purpose is not beautification or aesthetics, but it does make it difficult to meet some of the policy standards. What would your take on that be?
I would have to defer to flood control engineers. I'm the biologist, so I can talk to you about plants. But I would have to defer to them in terms of stability, and the maintenance supervisor in terms of access and ability to take more material onto the site.
All right. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on this subject? Seeing no one arise, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to staff. Any further comments, staff? Ms. Pujo?
The only comments I have is that we have outlined a number of Toro Canyon Plan policies within the staff report. I think they start on page 6, and then we have a draft finding for you, which in this case is structured to find it potentially in conformity with the comprehensive plan, and that's found on attachment A. You might want to look in those two locations if in your deliberations.
All right. Thank you very much. This is a first district item. Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I initially in reviewing the situation, was inclined to support staff's recommendation that it could, in observation of all of the policies, be made consistent, but it would require a lot of work. It would not be similar to how the property's been used in the past. And emergency use is one thing, but we'd be basically saying that an ongoing easement for this purpose at this location, highly visible, and I do mean that. If it were a little bit back, like some of the Carpinteria parcels, where you didn't see it every time you drove by, it would be completely different. But on this site, I've come to the conclusion that it cannot be consistent. So I can't support staff's recommendation in this regard, and would vote against a motion if my fellow commissioners believe otherwise.
Commissioner Boyson.
You know, Mr. Chair, this is one of those situations where I try and do a site visit on every project that we have come before us. I looked at this one. My time constraints were such that, geez, this looks like a slam dunk, so I probably won't even go by it. And so I'm going to admit, I have not seen the property. I've not looked at it. I'm going to have to abstain from voting without having that information. So unless it were continued, I think that would have to be my position on this, and I apologize for my lack of diligence on this project. But every time I've not done a site visit, I get bitten by it. So here's another example.
Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I would really like to hear more from flood control concerning the question that I asked Ms. Spencer. And I do have some concerns about this site, and in view of these other sites that we saw in the Carpinteria area, how they end up being a plateau, and while that's, I think, a little bit different than it is here. I would just need to have some other additional information and or assurances from flood control about how this property is going to be used. I realized we don't always know that in the future, but I do have additional questions, and I know that we've got on these consistency determinations, there is always this question of time. And if we are going to adhere to that, I'm not going to be able to vote in favor of it, because I just have more questions that need to be answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think there's two things here. One is emergency, using the site for emergency, and the other for regular maintenance of these areas. And I think I could support the emergency, but the regular maintenance, I can understand Commissioner Cooney's concern. And my question to Commissioner Cooney, could you support just the emergency portion of the item, Commissioner Cooney?
Well, I think what has been the case in the past is that the flood control doesn't require an easement for purposes of emergency stockpiling. Then it would be moved off. What's happened on this site is that the follow-up permits have allowed the material to stay in place. And while I would never be concerned with the landowner allowing temporary deposit, and I certainly don't want to indicate that here, I think the request before us is to acquire the easement so this can be a main depository site. And it is going to be ultimately the decision of the flood control district as to whether or not to do this, and it isn't our decision as to that. All we can say is that it's consistent or not with the comprehensive plan. In this case, a very well thought through and recent comprehensive plan. So I think our jurisdiction is limited here, but our message should be clear that this isn't an appropriate site.
Ms. Meester, would you like to see this item continued, or would you like us to take a ballot?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe we can continue it because of the deadline. The 40 days is up on June 23rd, so I think you ought to just move forward and structure your motion and give some indication as to why you don't believe it can be found consistent, if that's the will of the commission.
All right, thank you.
And we'll formalize those findings and in the minutes and.
Would you
action
like to
on it.
make a comment?
If I may,
Yes.
Mr. Commissioner, I would like to just offer that if anybody has any additional concerns, I would be glad to bring those concerns back here. I understand that we can't continue it, but I would like to offer that it is possible to contour the site. I know that we generally don't do that, and I don't know to what extent we can, but I don't want to preclude that as a possibility for us to be able to use this site. This is a situation where it would be great for flood control to be able to use this site. It might be a situation that it's years and years before there's any difference, real visual difference to the site. And I would also like to add that there are other things that we can do to beautify the site as well, including seeding of the site with erosion control mix so that it's not it doesn't become just a pile of dirt. I would like to say that if we do seed the site, that we would choose just a standard erosion control mix that could include some natives such as poppies and such, but it would not include the shrubs and those kinds of things that would create then a habitat that we would not be able to stockpile on. So I'd like to offer that up as a possibility and the possibility of also contouring the site so it doesn't become such a plateau.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, just to move this matter along, and realizing that this is a small part of a bigger picture and our concern for visual impacts is greater here, I do appreciate your offer and would like to work with flood control to see what we can do, not only with this site, but with others in the future. As far as our finding of inconsistency here, I would move that we convey to the flood control district a finding that the application to deposit on this site to acquire an easement for that purpose is inconsistent with the general plan.
Thank you. Any further comments? Commissioner Montgomery.
Technically, what we do, we vote, put the motion up. If it goes down, then staff comes back with the reasons for us to,
No,
how does it work? Yeah.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Montgomery, I think it would be best if the motion that Commissioner Cooney makes include the policies that you believe the project is not consistent with, at least some general indication. So what I think I've heard is you're particularly concerned with visual policies in the Toro community
That's correct.
plan.
The ones that have been cited in the staff report are all the ones I'm relying on.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And
And then
Commissioner.
if that motion doesn't pass, is that what you were asking?
Well, don't we first have to vote on decide on the recommendations of staff?
No.
No, okay, thank
No,
you.
you can do an alternate motion. You don't have to do
Any
that.
further comments? All right, Commissioner Cooney.
Well, I've made the motion, Mr. Chair, so I think we're waiting for a second and then a vote on my motion.
I will second the motion.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? All right, Ms. Contreras, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Boyson,
Abstain.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Montgomery,
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia.
Aye.
Vote carries 4-1.
401.
All right, thank you. That concludes that item.
Okay.
Any comments from the staff?
Mr. Chair, not on this item, but I believe, I apologize that the agenda is a bit confused today. We were trying to accommodate UCSB, and I think we need to now move, if the commission wishes, to item number 3. That is projected to take an hour on your agenda. I don't know that it will, so we can start and see how far we get by 11 o'clock if you'd like.
Right.
But I know the staff person is here, as is the applicant.
All right.
So if that's
All right, well, is the person here for item number 3? All right, we'll allow a 2-minute setup.
okay, thank you. Why don't you?
Has Equestrian Association and conditional use permit and rezone Ms. Contreras, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you. The following is a hearing on the request of Forrest Rigel, agent for the San Ynez Equestrian Association, to consider the following: 03 CUP 61 and 06 RZN 04, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15061 of the state guidelines for the implementation of CEQA.
All right, Shelley Ingram? Ms. Ingram?
Good morning, Chairman Valencia and Commissioners. Today, the project you have in front of you is for a rezone for approximately 23-acre property located in Refugio Road in San Ynez. You can see the project site on the PowerPoint.
Excuse me for a second, I forgot to ask something. Any site visits or ex parte? Commissioner Boyson?
Yes, I did a site visit, no ex parte with the exception of staff.
Commissioner Brown?
I did a site visit on Monday with 2 other site visits to consolidate site visits so I wouldn't have excess mileage.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooney?
I visited the site yesterday. It was 97 degrees and smoky.
All right, and Commissioner Montgomery?
Yes, I had a long visit early last year, with the managers and the nonprofit users of the property, and I don't remember the testimony. It was so long ago, but I know the site very, very well and the operation.
Thank you very much. And I also did a site visit in this beautiful country, God's country. All right, and with that, Ms. Ingram?
Commissioners, I would like to note that we do have a late submittal. It's a memo from myself outlining the information provided in a memo from the Agricultural Commissioner's Office, which I'll address later in the presentation. This slide shows some brief information about the site. I would also like to note that the agricultural lands surrounding the site, of the 8 lands directly around the site, 6 of them are in agricultural preserve. This shows the present land use designation of the site. This slide shows the present zoning district designation, which is 40 AL0, and the rezoning proposal in front of you proposes to change this to AG 240, which is consistent with the proposed zoning that is part of the San Ynez Community Plan. This slide shows the star represents the site in relation to the townships of Solvang, San Ynez, Highway 246, and Highway 154. This slide shows the site itself, and from this slide you can see that the facility is easily divided into 3 sectors: the upper, the central, and the lower section. And the next slide shows this in a little bit more detail. The proposal in front of you encompasses the activities of an existing equestrian facility that has been in the area since the 1960s. It provides an arena and riding facilities for the approximately 400 members of the association. And an average of 6 members and their horses use the facility daily. There is also a therapeutic riding program that uses the facility on a 3 to 4 time a week basis. They have 6 horses that are the only permanent residents, other than the people. And they also request to host 39 equestrian events and 1 fundraiser each year as part of their conditional use permit. The next slide shows the trailer parking area and the 2 arenas on the right that are consistently used for the horse shows. One arena is used for a warm-up area, the other arena is used for the horse show itself. And it should also be noted that figure number 8 on this map is a 240 square foot horse shelter that has been designated for removal in order to protect the stream bank of the stream that runs through the middle of the property. And again, the proposal we have here today, the request today, is for a consistency rezone from 40 AL0 to AG 240 and a major conditional use permit to validate an existing daily use of a commercial, albeit nonprofit, stable riding and boarding facility with a maximum of 40 special events. These events have been divided into two categories. The events will be conducted between April and October annually. This site has traditionally had between 12 and 24 events and presently holds approximately 30 events. The applicant is asking for an additional 10 events to be identified later, but to be limited to fewer than 100 attendees. The two categories we've divided the events into are events which involve humans and horses, and the numbers of attendees are divided approximately 75% participants and 25% assistants, spectators, people coming to help the participants. And you can see the numbers of each events that are proposed. The second category is events that require the importation of cattle. And these events include cutting, team penning, and team sorting. We've averaged the number of cattle to be roughly equal to the number of horses in these events, even though the cutting shows will probably use more cattle than the team penning. The next slide just gives you an overview of the structures on the site. And then water service is provided by an off-site well for which the applicants have easements. However, the present well seal does not meet state standards, and the applicants have been notified that a new seal or a new well would be required in order to be in accordance with environmental health service standards and state standards. The septic systems on the property, there are 3 septic systems, and they have been determined to be permitted and adequate for the proposed use, with the addition of portable toilets for events with more than 100 participants. 2 of the things that we did address, which I did not make a slide for, are the noise and the dust created by the Ag Commissioner's office in particular had concern about dust because of the organic nature of the vineyards next to the facility. And the applicants are willing and will provide us with a dust management plan. In reviewing the staff report, I felt that the dust mitigation measures listed in the conditions were not adequate, and I would like to add to those. The noise element would also need to be addressed. It should be noted that there was a zoning violation filed on this property. One of the components of that was noise from the loudspeaker system, and the applicants rectified that, and we have not had a complaint since. As far as services, the fire station at Airport Road provides fire protection. The access is provided via Mesa Verde Road, and the parking areas on this site roughly can handle 60 trucks and trailers and 28 cars. The project as proposed has been determined to be consistent with all applicable comprehensive plan policies and the zoning ordinance provisions. And I would like to make one note that the findings in the staff report refer to the Planning Commission, and they should refer to the board. But we would like to recommend that your commission's recommendation to the board include the following 4 items, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions? All right, we'll go to the applicant. The applicant would like to speak.
Thank you.
Mr. Rigel?
Chairman Valencia and members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
My name is David Hunsaker, and I'm currently the executive director of the San Ynez Valley Equestrian Association. I'm relatively new to that position, having served previously sometime in the mid-90s during the formation of the early days of the organization as its president, and have been asked to come back on board to help them hopefully get this conditional use permit granted and deal with several other financial concerns we have there. I'd like to maybe start by saying, first of all, we have a deep appreciation for the work that Shelley has done on our behalf, and we find absolutely nothing within her requirements that we feel that we could not live with. If you would allow me for just a moment, I'd like to give you just a brief history on our center. It all began in 1995 when Miss Jody Carcello donated 23 acres with a specific understanding that we would turn it into an equestrian center for the greater use of the people in our community who held and enjoyed the lifestyle of horses. We formed a 501c3 corporation and began the development of that equestrian association with the following mission in mind. And if you allow me, I'd just like to read our mission. It is our mission to provide a multi-use facility for equine activities with accompanying educational experiences in order to foster safe and humane horsemanship. Our goal is to develop, maintain, and operate our equestrian facility in a manner that preserves and enriches our community's equestrian lifestyle, including youth and therapeutic riding. The center is envisioned as a resource that will attract quality equestrian events and innovative instructions to improve that special relationship between horse and human. One of the things that currently, happens to us on occasions is that living in that beautiful Santa Ynez Valley, as you've all described it, is that we're often described as being a wealthy bunch of people attempting to play cowboy. In fact, it couldn't be further from the truth. Our organization is entirely staffed by volunteers. Nobody is there on a paid basis, and the amount of hours and volunteers that we are able to bring to our center at any time to help us is just amazing. It's a real tribute to the amount of interest that is in fact associated with our organization. We have a very limited source of funds. The majority of our funds come from our membership fees. We do charge a very reasonable rental fee for the use of that facility for shows. We have a limited number of grants that we apply for each year and sometimes are successful in getting. The balance of our funds come from patrons and from members of our community who share our similar interests. We're also the home of the therapeutic riding and that unique and special need that they provide for our community. And now we're the home of the Junior Equestrian Drill Team, sponsored by the Sheriff's Activity League. We also provide a venue for both the 4-H and FFA to use in conducting classes on showmanship and other educational activities. As a matter of fact, we have a far greater demand for the use of our facility than we're currently able to provide. In October of 2003, we filed an application for a conditional use permit, and to date we've spent approximately $40,000 in attempting to get that permit granted. In July of 2003, we were informed by Barbara Walshon of Santa Barbara Planning and Development that we had a barn and office structure and 3 containers which had been erected without permits. We were ordered to obtain a land use permit or remove the buildings. We informed Barbara Walshon in August of 2003 that we did indeed have land use permits for these structures and sent her copies of the permits. Nevertheless, we were fined $2,000 for a violation fee. At about this time in October, we also indicated that we would cooperate with the county on rezoning with regards to our current zoning of AL 40, Ag Limited 40, to an Ag 240, which would be compatible with the adjoining properties, and then that would allow us to have a commercial riding stable. As a matter of fact, we do not have a commercial riding stable, or do we have any plans to develop one. The facilities are there entirely for the use of the therapeutic riding. During this application period, our permit was given to a staff member, and she spent approximately 28 hours on this process and was subsequently, terminated for cause. Our records show that we've had about 7 people who've been a part of this process, and while we feel that there may be charges that we'd like to dispute, we're really only interested in moving forward. We have reviewed the 32-page document that Ms. Ingram has provided, and we find, again, nothing in it that we can't live with. Only as a matter of curiosity, I would say to you, I understand, and we're certainly willing and prepared to do it, and that's either develop a new well or provide a sanitary seal on our existing well, which will comply with the state and county requirements. As a matter of fact, at each of our venues, we have a vendor who provides fresh water and juices for all of our participants. We have a vending machine there at the location, which also provides bottled water. And I'm sure even if we had potable water, we wouldn't find anybody drinking out of a hose bib. But be that as it may, we are perfectly well and agreed to that if a new well would be part of those conditions, we're certainly willing to comply with it. Once again, we find nothing to object to in Ms. Ingram's report, and look forward to hopefully a hasty approval of our CUP.
Thank you, Mr. Hunziker.
Thank
We
you.
have some questions for you. Commissioner
Sure.
Montgomery.
Yes, I appreciate your support of the of staff's recommendations. This is the time, if there really are some things that will impede your programs, to surface them. We have a reasonable amount of flexibility here. If there's some conditions you've accepted because you felt it was better course of valor to go along than to not, let us know. If you're happy with this, I think that's great.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I understand the law and I understand the requirements as far as the well is concerned. We think it's an unusual requirement with respect to how we operate there. I do plan to meet with the ID district, water district tomorrow in Solvang with the possibility of potentially exchanging the riparian rights to our well there in the river for the possibility of hooking up to ID1. When we looked at that previously, there was about a $40,000 cost to the association for us to do that. We obviously could not afford it then and can't afford it now. So if there's some trade-off that they might be willing to consider as a part of using that well for irrigation water or additional waters to be put into the river during low periods, I'd like to explore that opportunity with them. The other conditions are very simply easy for us to meet. The waste management plan, we had previously developed a waste management plan, and somewhere along the line it fell into the abyss. We will, in fact, are in the process of developing a new waste management plan which deals primarily with how we handle horse manure. There is a dumpster on site there. We try to police it on a daily basis. It's generally the responsibility of the individual riders who use that center on a daily basis to pick up any horse manure while they're there. After each and every show, the grounds are completely swept and cleaned. Everything is deposited into the container for collection by Moorburg on a weekly basis. We have when we own a large water truck, which is used for dust control and for the preparation of our arenas both before, during, and after all of our shows. Nobody wants dust mitigated any more than the riders who are there participating. So we don't feel that dust control is a problem. As far as the removal of that building, which had been a shelter during the period of the life estate for Ms. Carcello, there are no horses maintained on that property. We have no problem with removal of that building and think we could do all of these things with the exception of the well within the next 3 months.
Mr. Hunziker, Commissioner Cooney has a question.
Actually, I have two, Mr. Hunziker. First of all, with regard to development of the vacant portion, the upper portion, I'll call it, do you have plans yet for any kind of internal passageway for animals and riders to get from where they're housed below up to that area, or will they be required to use the road?
No, we discourage the use of the road. There is an existing internal road which needs to be worked on to provide the sort of opportunity to use that upper acreage. It's something that we have volunteers who are willing to do. It will not require any extensive grading. It's just really a matter of improving the existing road bed, which would allow them to traverse through the back part of the property. You have access to the upper acreage.
Okay, and the second concerns lighting. There isn't, I don't believe, a condition on night lighting, but it's a concern in that beautiful area if there was extensive lighting and it wasn't properly installed. I know you're not planning nighttime events, but do your existing buildings have lighting for people to work around the paddocks and so forth if it gets dark in the winter months?
We have no plans for lighting in any of our arenas. We understand the restrictions with respect to no nighttime shows. There are currently no lights on that facility other than a barn light, which is part of the therapeutic riding facility, but we have no lights on any portion of our project there, or any plans to develop any.
Would it be an imposition to your association if there was a condition which required any new lighting to be hooded and down-facing?
Absolutely not, no.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any further questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. This time, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who wishes to speak on this subject? Commissioner Boyson, do we have anything in the... Seeing no one rise, we'll close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to staff. Staff, there was a memo here, and I just kind of question is, this has been in the works for a long time. How long has the Ag Commissioner had this information? Mr. Carmelitos? Or...
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, this case has been under application for several years. In the current scenario with the agricultural planner working out of the Ag Commissioner's office, we just, since the staff report was distributed, engaged them. My understanding of the Ag Advisory Committee's role here has been they're not looking at individual projects, but based on the comments that we received since submittal of the staff report, we decided to submit this additional information to you in the form of a memo with the Ag Commissioner's memo attached.
When did the Ag Commissioner come to you with this information?
This has just been over the last 24 hours, 48 hours.
Thank you. Seems like a little late. Commissioner Boyson.
Yes, Mr. Karamitsos, you and I spoke earlier regarding the specific zoning to the Ag 2100 or the Ag 240. The land use designation is obviously the Ag 2100, but I notice that the surrounding lands are kind of all over the place. There's an Ag 120 catty corner on the northwest, and there's Ag 240 to the south and Ag 2100 north. Did you ever do any investigation with comprehensive planning as to the rhyme and reason here?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Boyson, in the past year, at least, we have coordinated with comprehensive planning on this and have understood for that time that the anticipated zone designation for this property is in fact the 40-acre minimum parcel size. Since you and I spoke, we did reconfirm that with comprehensive planning staff. So we feel that in terms of coordination with the long-range planning effort, this is a consistent effort and designation.
Is this within that inner rural zone of the San Ynez? I noticed that Ag 120 over there, which would...
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Boyson, at the staff table here, we don't believe so, but I can't speak definitively to that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Montgomery.
I'd like to piggyback where the Chairman Valencia was going on the request of the Agricultural Commissioner's Office for additional time. I don't question their authority or their integrity, but reading the body of their memo, the memorandum of June 20, it appears to me that all of the concerns that they expressed are being adequately addressed in staff's report and recommendations, so that I don't see any reason for us to give them any more time. They obviously would have another crack at it at the Board of Supervisors in any case. But I'd like to just take this as an opportunity to again talk about so-called late hits. And I'm so pleased that in the PIT, the approving process, we get all the parties together at the outset of a project, including now an enhanced interest on the part of the Ag Commission. And it's not just, it's a question of fairness to an applicant that everybody get into the game. And here we have P&D functioning at an incredibly high professional level with highest support from the public that probably any such department has in the state. And then the public doesn't understand where these late hits come from, whether it's Public Works, and I'm happy that we're going to be talking to them later, or it's environmental health, or it's the Ag Commission. And I hope that they would all have it in their heart, sort of the same feeling for applicants that planning and development has, and avoid these late hits, because it's unfair to applicants, and it sets us back. At the same time, in previous discussions with some of the departments other than planning and development, there appears to be sort of a defensive attitude that somehow or other their criteria are more important, and they may in fact be, but again, it's not fair to bring these items up too early in the game. Also, it makes it very difficult for the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors to make the appropriate adjustment in some of the policies of the other departments if they lead to an unfair result for an applicant. So I don't, for one, don't see any reason why we delay or amend. I agree with Commissioner Cooney on any lighting should be shaded.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Meester?
Mr. Chair, if I could just make a comment first in response to Commissioner Montgomery's comments. Thank you. I really appreciate the acknowledgement of the work the department's been doing, because I think it has been substantial. I could sort of go through the history of this case and why the Ag Commissioner wasn't included earlier, but I don't think that's really the purpose of our role here today, be it as it may. They were included late, and I don't blame them, and I don't blame the staff. It's just a set of circumstances when a new program is introduced into the mix, and there are cases in process. So I think, we can work through this. I don't think there will be any issues that will need to be resolved at the Board of Supervisors. I think it'll work its way out. So I would recommend that the Commission go ahead and act today, but I did want to assure you that we are attempting very diligently to work with the Ag Commissioner's office, and they actually decide when something should be taken to the Ag Advisory Committee or not. And the Ag Advisory Committee has provided some guidance on projects they want to see and projects they don't want to see. But we are really trying to work with them, but it is still a relatively new program, only been in existence for 7 or 8 months. And some of these projects that have been around for a while do fall through the cracks. One other point I wanted to make, just to reassure the Commission, this applicant will not be paying for the costs of the consistency rezone to the Board of Supervisors per board and departmental policy. So the hearing costs associated with the Board of Supervisors will not be borne by the applicant. And if there are billing issues that the applicant wishes the department to look at, we will obviously do that as we do in other cases. So just wanted to let you know.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Diane. Mr. Chair, concerning the lighting, it would be my preference, since the applicant seems agreeable, to put a standard in there that there be no night lighting. And the reason I say that is the county currently has no standards for lighting. They're very ambiguous, they're very nebulous. It doesn't really get to the heart of the kinds of standards that you need to protect the rural nature of this valley from light trespass and glare. In fact, my driving around in the valley at night, there is quite a bit of that already, and unless you have some very exacting standards, you're not going to cut down on this these problems. So it would be my preference to see a standard that there be no night lighting, and if the applicant did at some point in time want to come back to do night lighting, then at that time the Commission could come back with some very exacting standards, but we'd need to hear from the applicant.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hunsaker, to the mic, please.
If I might only ask for a point of clarification with respect to night lighting. The vast majority of ranches and farms there in the valley do have some sort of night lighting that comes on at dusk and goes off during the daylight hours, primarily for security. And I have to tell you that I'm not totally familiar with what the handicap riding facility has there, but I'm assuming you're saying that anything on that property, you would not want to have any sort of night lighting. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm suggesting is that it would be lighting of the arenas.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that from your comments, that was your intention, that you would not be
that
wanting
is
to
in
light
fact
that.
our intention,
Right.
and we have no
Right.
future plans to ever have lighting for
Right.
any events there at night. But we will light for security for both the handicap area and a barn small barn light for security at our main barn and office.
Right, no, the intention was for the arenas so that there would be no activities.
Understood and agreed
okay.
to.
Okay, great,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Just for clarification, my issue was with the existing and any new lighting having to do with security lighting around the existing barns.
both.
I just wanted to make sure it was downward
Okay,
hooded.
that it was
and-
fully
and-
shielded and
exactly.
full
so-
cutoff.
Yes, and that's
Okay.
easy to comply with. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. All right. See, Commander Boyson.
No, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, with the understanding that the Ag Commissioner's Office will be kept fully in the loop on this and that they can respond at the board level with any additional concerns, whether they be noise, dust, buffer zones, whatever they come up with. I'm willing to support the project.
All right, and I am willing to support the project too. Commissioner Montgomery, this is your district.
I'd like to move that we move the, I guess it's easier to read the whole thing because we have an amendment. All right. I'd like to move that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors that it adopt the required findings for 06 RZN 4 and 03 CUP 61 specified in Attachment A of this staff report, including CEQA findings. 2, accept the exemption pursuant to CEQA sections 15301, 15303, 15304 included in Attachment B. And 3, approve 03 CUP 61 subject to the conditions included as Attachment C. And 4, adopt the ordinance included in Attachment D approving rezone 06 RZN 4, rezoning 141460009 to 010 to 011 from 40 ALO to Ag to 40, with the amendment to the condition that the security lighting be shaded.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that with the amendment to the conditions concerning no night lighting of the arenas.
All right, thank you.
And I think we have the amendment also that was presented today.
All right, any further discussion? All right, do you agree to that amendment, Commissioner Montgomery?
Yes, and I did want to comment that I hope that something can be worked out on the water issue.
All right, thank you. And with that, Ms. Contreras, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Boyson?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Montgomery?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. And we've concluded item number 3. Do we have the people here for item number 1? All right. We'll take a 1-minute break to set up. Master plan. Ms. Contreras, could you read that into the record, please?
Thank you. The County Planning Commission will receive a presentation on the content and public process for the UCSB Housing Master Plan.
All right, and who is giving the presentation?
Actually, there's two of us. I'm Gene Lucas. I'm the Executive Vice Chancellor for the campus, and Mark Fisher is here, Associate Vice Chancellor for Design and Facilities. I'm going to give you a minute or so of context for this, and then Mark's going to present the housing capacity study. So I wanted to let the Commission know that we're in the process of writing our next long-range development plan. We do planning in 15 to 20-year increments, and we're at the end of our old one, and we're at the beginning of our new one. So if I can have the next slide, Mark. So just to remind everybody, UC Santa Barbara's become a top-tier university. We're elected to the American Association of Universities in 1995. That's the top 62 out of about 4,000 in North America. Graham Diamond Report ranked us second amongst American public research universities. And you can see there the campus is the home of 5 Nobel laureates and various members of the national academies. And of course, you know from the newspaper, we just had a Millennium Technology Prize winner, the second in the world in Shuji Nakamura. So we're quite proud of that. Mark? In the last decade, we've doubled our extramural research. We do almost $150 million a year in terms of money that comes from outside of the university, largely federal contract and grant money. And private giving has quadrupled to almost $70 million a year. And we've pioneered many exciting new things on the campus, and certainly compound semiconductors and light emitting diodes are some of the things that are in the news today. So, Mark. We're, of course, continue to be the largest employer in the county of Santa Barbara. We spend almost $400 million a year annually in the region just out of the UCSB budget, not including the students and the staff that are employed at UCSB. And we've, of course, spun off many valuable companies and businesses to the Santa Barbara area as a result of research that's done at the university, and we're one of the social entertainment centers for the area as well. Now, we've set our planning horizon to the year 2025 to align that with the University of California planning horizon. We've been looking at this for a couple of years now at various scenarios that range from zero growth. We're at a population of about 20,000 students, fall, winter, spring average at this point in time. And one of our scenarios is to look at remaining at about that size, as well as a scenario which has some growth. And the upper limit of our growth scenario is about 1% per year to the year 2025. And over the same time period, we're looking at what happens to the existing population, and we turn over about half of our staff and faculty in the same time periods. We have to look at accommodating the replacement staff and faculty that would be associated with that. We are looking at some growth within the context of what's going to happen to the University of California as a whole, with enrollments increasing from about 180,000 to 240,000 over the same time period, and acknowledging that the vast majority of our students that we graduate from the University of California stay in California to work. So, Mark, last one. So various elements of the long-range development plan have been in process at this point in time, and they're listed there. I won't go through them in view of the time. And the one that we wanted to present to you today is the housing capacity study, and Mark Fisher has a presentation for that, and I'll assist him in making that presentation. At the end, we'll be available for any questions that you might have.
Not do that. Hi, I'm Mark Fisher, and this afternoon, actually, or this morning, I think it's still morning, we're going to see a little bit more than the housing plan. This is actually a piece of our campus plan that describes the plan that we've looked at in terms of the physical development of the campus attached to that or associated with the academic plan that Jean just outlined. So, and I'll do this very, very quickly this morning because I know you have time limitations. First of all, we're roughly 1,000 acres. We're everything inside the red lines on this diagram. So I can see if I can get rid of that. And extending out from the Devereaux Slough on the west side of campus over to the core campus, which is roughly 400 acres. Architecturally, the campus is quite eclectic. We represent all the periods of architecture from the 1950s until today, and so good or bad, that's what was going on in college in terms of college architecture and planning. Our campus really represents what was happening in this country during that time period. Moved there in 1954. It's a Marine base. I was out today looking at some of these buildings. We're going to try to get rid of some this year, but we still have a number of the old Marine base buildings, so and that's an issue we're addressing. The Vigley Frank Lloyd Wright buildings by Charles Luckman are representing the upper right of that slide, and then a lot of international style architecture at the bottom of the slide, and a little bit of American brutalism in Kerr Hall and also Stork Plaza. So again, representing all the periods of architecture that were things that were happening in the country we were doing on this campus. In the 80s and 90s, the quality of the architecture improves. This has a lot to do with David Gephardt and his involvement with the campus or involvement with the selection of architects. And you start to see buildings like the Michael Graves Cone Hall on the upper left, Sasaki Building, top center, which is our RegCen building from San Francisco. Zimmer Gunzel Frasca, Bob Frasca designed the building in the upper right. That's our humanities building. And on the bottom, two Bob Stern buildings, which are on the east, or Academic Green. And Bob Stern did the piece on American architecture for PBS. So again, the quality of the architecture and the quality of the architects improved during this time period. More recently, I think we've been building a number of, really good buildings. I'm very proud of these. Top left, top right, our new Manzanita housing project. It's now almost 3 years old. I still think of it as new. I think this is some of the best student housing in the state, public or private. Center of the slide is our intercollegiate athletics building by Meredith Yazdani from Los Angeles. And then center left is actually a very interesting project. This is taking one of the old Charles Luckman projects, doing a gut remodel, stripping it to the structure and rebuilding it as a modern dining facility. This is Delaguerre Dining Commons. If you know the campus, and many of you I know are graduates, you know that this, it was what it was, but it's a very different place today. It meets the standards of dining commons across the country. Bottom right is our new engineering science building, a couple of years old now, by Antion & Allen, Los Angeles. And then bottom left, two buildings we're very proud of, the Bren School, which is one of the first platinum-rated, LEED-rated buildings in the country, and then the Marine Science Building, the companion building, which are actually looking through Bren to that building. Building's currently under construction. As you know, we have a lot of construction on the campus if you've been out there recently. In fact, that last one that come up is one that we're really excited about. But upper left is our new graduate student housing by Fields and Devereaux, Los Angeles. This is on the historic campus site, which is the west side of campus out by the historic fields. 976 beds of graduate student housing with 976 parking spaces. If you drive on El Colegio today, you'll see this. It's a huge construction site, 4 blocks long. It's hard to miss. Top right's our new student resource building. This finishes this summer. This is by Sasaki, San Francisco. This is a student, essentially, meeting building. It's a piece of what used to go into student centers across the country. Those centers have turned into more of a retail complex, and this sort of building is growing out of that the student groups still need a place to meet, and we're not the first to build this, but I think this is a very interesting building for its social diagram. Center of this slide is a building by Coleman McKennell & Wood from Boston. 3 buildings, actually. Michael McKennell's the lead designer. He designed Boston City Hall. Again, a very exciting complex. The building on the left of the 3-building complex is our new Center for Film, Television, New Media. It's a fully donor-funded building, the first fully donor-funded building on our campus. And I think this is an important trend for the future of the campus, is what you'll be seeing more of. This is funded by a series of donors, including some of our alums. Very exciting. The center building is a social sciences building. The right building is our new Graduate School of Education. We hope to start construction on this series of buildings this fall. We're in the middle of, like any project that's bid recently. It's had a series of budget issues that we're working on. I think we're pretty close. Middle right, the building with the white facade, gray and white, is our new drama dance building. We're almost finished with that. It completes late fall. And bottom left is our California Nanosystems Institute by Bob Venturi, Philadelphia, that we're just wrapping up right now. And that's a major science initiative project and very exciting to see complete. And then lower right, a project we're very excited about, and in the early design phase, is a new gate for the east entrance to campus. If you come to campus today, we're currently, starting yesterday or starting Monday actually, we've ripped up the road, or we're ripping up the road. There's a lot of construction activity out there. Ultimately, we'll have a new stone gate feature. You can see the night version of it there. We're going to have a new driveway. The stoplight goes away. A circle will be built in its place. There's a lot of change for the east side of campus. All new landscaping, graphics, really transforming the east side of campus. Process, like anybody in Santa Barbara County, we go through a lot of process. We establish what we like about the campus in green dots here. This, we like the ocean, the lagoon, the mountains. There's a theme. The East Bluffs, the Pardell Corridor, landscape corridor, the academic green on the east side of campus, and the rec facilities. We didn't really identify our buildings as a strength on this campus. We said really the strength of the campus was the piece of real estate, the surrounding, this sort of asset of being in this incredible location. Things we didn't like about the campus, some of those old military buildings, the trailers, cargo containers, and both of those are disappearing this summer, by the way. We were out this morning again looking at that. Loading docks with ocean views. This has already been taken care of. We're working on it. The plaza, historic plaza, the bus drop-off, which is just sort of a tough space, and the interface between bikes, pedestrians, and cars. This is something that we have grown used to, but urban designers, planners really have a hard time with that interface, and how do you fine-tune it? We love the bikes. They are a great alternative means of transportation for this campus, but it is difficult. The interface is a bit difficult because the bikes don't stop, as you know, if you've been on our campus. In terms of density, this was a figure ground drawing. You've seen these before from architects. Black represents buildings, white's open space. Left side of the slide is obviously Isla Vista, which is a very fine textured, high density area. On the right is the campus, which looks fairly built out. And architects do these drawings to see, where you might find space for future development, to think about how you might utilize the campus. If you take away the military buildings, the trailers, the containers that have turned into offices, and I think one permanent building, you can see that a lot of open space opens up on the campus. Think about connecting those spaces. You suddenly see these great malls that can cut across the site and really connect the site out to the ocean, the mountains, the lagoon. The big idea here is to connect the core campus to the landscape, to say, okay, this is our great asset. How do we utilize it to its maximum potential? We know today that if you stand in the middle of the campus, you oftentimes can't see that site. We want to rectify that. Another major space that goes from Stork Tower, again, leading up to a mountain view on the north. Probably the most important is a north-south space that goes from University Plaza and our new alumni house down to the lagoon. And then secondary and tertiary paths across the campus, again, always oriented to the view. So you're creating these great view corridors out from the site. Overlaid with open spaces, what you might see in terms of quadrangles and the parks that would develop in and around the campus. Building sites, because when campuses do this, we're always interested in the carrying capacity. What could you build on this site if you did decide you were going to grow? And this starts to establish where building sites might occur. And then in red, where those buildings might be a little bit more formally, and finally, what they might look like in a detailed plan. This represents, or represented when we first studied this, about 3 million gross square feet of space. We have about 5 million gross square feet today. So it's a lot of capacity, but that includes things like parking, housing, academic space, support space. So it's probably not as much as it sounds, but it does suggest that the campus can meet if we were to grow to 25,000 students, as Jean just outlined, we can definitely handle that capacity. We have the capacity for that growth. This was a slide that was established just to show how much we're doing today. Again, it's about $1 billion. I think that's the number the chancellor is using now through the year 2010, from 2003 to 2010, roughly $1 billion worth of construction on the campus. It's everywhere. It surrounds all the edges, so the transformation is happening today as we speak. If you go out there today, I could stand you in places that you couldn't see the ocean before, and you can see it now. I'm very proud of that because we're building this plan incrementally, which means it's a realistic, doable plan for the campus. In 3 dimensions, this is the mall that goes from University Plaza down to Lagoon. At the bottom of that slide is obviously a Lagoon, mountains on the north. The little buildings at the bottom, the one-story buildings, were buildings that were built under that plan by Charles Luckman early on the campus, and they blocked ocean views. So you take away some of the small buildings, establish where new buildings might go that reinforce the edges of spaces, and suddenly you see new spaces develop that really are great campus spaces connecting the mountains to the north, the ocean to the south, and really creating the ability to move through the campus in a clear, logical fashion, which frankly today we don't have. The campus is a very difficult place to navigate unless you know the campus. So this is really a chance to establish this clear hierarchy and ordering of a campus that really wasn't developed around that sort of planning. It has a very nice common sense approach. This is developed, by the way, not just by the campus, but with Urban Design Associates from Pittsburgh, who I think have done a great job of helping us through this process. The east-west, this is part all extending from Isla Vista on the top of that slide down to the bluffs. There are a series of small buildings in the middle that block this. You can see there's almost a mall here. It's almost right. Take away those small buildings, and some of those buildings will fall down if they're not taken down, and you suddenly see places for sites for new buildings, and then part all extending all the way from Isla Vista to the bluffs. This is probably the most important student space because the students move through this corridor all day long. They really want to get from where they live, which is Isla Vista for the most part, to campus and back again. And right now that transit system across the campus for bicycles really breaks down at the library, and this gives a clear path across the campus. So the potential here for huge change, and I think fairly easy change, frankly. Another one I think that's important from a community perspective, that's the old gym in the middle of the slide with a sort of barrel roof. It's currently painted red, Stork Towers in the background. If you take away those buildings, which are mostly built by the military or their trailers, you can see a lot of open space that opens up in the center here. Potential for new buildings left and right. In fact, the building on the right is much smaller scale than it's shown there because that is that new Center for Film, Television, New Media. And then what that might look like finished. And this has a new transit hub at the bottom. Proper place for buses to arrive on campus. The bus is very important for us. We're having very high ridership these days because we're offering free bus passes if you give up your parking pass. And then pedestrian entry to the campus. So you leave the bus, you become a pedestrian, you actually can understand how the pedestrian engages the campus, and then Stork Tower is a marker that helps you find that portion of campus. So again, clear logic is a big part of the planning idea here. Stork Plaza, the planners couldn't resist looking at this. That's the condition today. It's pretty tough. Again, it's a brutalist space. And then their proposal really is to turn it into something more akin to the courthouse across the street. They really wanted to green the space, fold the edges in with turf and trees. We did put water back in the fountain, which I'm happy we've done that, but we have a long way to go in terms of correcting this space. The housing plan, which is what we said we were going to show you. We're not going to let you down there. The areas here shown in color, primarily orange or terracotta, are areas that we've identified for housing on the site. What we think we need to do is build housing both for our students, faculty, and staff. Because of the high cost of housing in Santa Barbara, Jean talked about the numbers of faculty members who will retire over the next few years. Even without growth, we think it's critical that we build housing to be able to keep people to both recruit and retain faculty for this campus. And also student housing. I think we do a good job of managing student housing. I think a fantastic job. And we know that that helps the academic experience. We also know that it probably helps ultimately Isla Vista if we house some of our students or more students on campus. So these are the areas we've identified. They are largely already developed sites. We know this is important to the community. We're not going into ag land. We're not going into wetland areas. We're really setting back from the open spaces, protecting those spaces, and building higher density housing within envelopes that are already housing sites, with the exception of one along Ocean Road and the one there in the sort of center top. That's where the facilities management site is. My office will be wiped out. No loss, right? This is the historic housing site in the final condition. Each of these neighborhoods, and we call these neighborhoods because we really see them as communities that have faculty, staff, and students. It's not segregated into those. The usual way of building this kind of housing is you build faculty housing in one location, staff housing. If you build that in a different location, and student housing in a separate, again, location, we really like to see them combined. We think that's important in terms of building an academic community. Each of these communities has a parking structure at the center lined by housing. It's the kind of planning you can probably only do in a place like the university, where you can really regulate who lives in the housing and how they live there, frankly, in some ways. Then outside of that, there's courtyard housing and then lower density housing at the edges. So the top of this slide backs up to the Stork Ranch community. The idea is when we back up to the community, we try to match the scale of that community, whether it's single family houses or duplexes, but it's generally the scale of a single family house where it meets single family houses, and higher density in the middle where there's lower impact. And then as you can see at the bottom of the slide, this is currently open space that is not developed in any way. There are no pedestrian trails or bike trails to this area. So what we've done is, the wetlands are obviously there, that we have the normal setbacks, and then within that setback plus some extra landscape space, with the opportunity to really develop this into a park. So you have these linear parks that connect all these projects together that really are based upon the existing assets, just the assets that we don't use today. And this is what it feels like being in that community. You're now looking out from that parking structure site toward the courtyard housing. There's a chance for a small amount of retail in this area. We're thinking about convenience, grocery stores, coffee shops, the sort of things you'd expect to find in a neighborhood. If you were in downtown Santa Barbara and some of the older neighborhoods, you would find those amenities. This is the condition today. Again, the wetlands here are really, they're treated as a backdoor space. We have parking lots lining the wetlands. The idea here is to take it from a backdoor condition to a front door condition, and that's the proposal. So you can see the pedestrian, we anticipate more pedestrians, more bikes, more usage of the edges of this space, and then the housing setting behind that. And you can see that even though we're adding quite a bit of density here in terms of numbers of units, we're really not changing the character. Those are today 3-story buildings, and largely we're putting 3-story buildings back, just more of it. By the way, this basically in this project triples the density. So you go from around 300 units today to 900 units. And each of those sites does roughly the same thing. It's between 2 and 3 times the existing density, which is how you justify knocking it down and building new, is you can get a lot more on that same land. And we think, by the way, better living situation on the same pieces of land. Again, a very important project, I think, in terms of the town-gown relationship. Isla Vista is on the left in this slide. On the right are the parking lots, which we're currently building buildings on. I need a new slide here. But this is the west edge of the core campus. This is a 4-lane road that goes nowhere. It goes down to the beach. And it's an old planning idea. These were ideas when you divided the campus from the community. These were the mechanisms. If you were on the East Coast in colleges, West Coast, this is what universities did. We divided ourselves. We put up fences and barricades. And we're suggesting that this is not the way we'd like to live in the future. We really think that it's important to integrate the community with the campus, and that there's a huge opportunity here. This came largely out of the planning process for Isla Vista, something Diane and Jamie Goldstein's back there, they were very much involved in, and we really built on the ideas that came out of that master planning process. So what we're suggesting is that we narrow that road to 2 lanes. We believe it can handle the capacity. In fact, if you look at the slide, it's always empty. There's never any cars on that street. It really is a 4-lane road to nowhere. So you can take the street, narrow it, and build quite a bit of housing here. We get about 560 units. This is one of the few sites that is a greenfield site, because obviously there's nothing there but those berms and fences today in the existing road. So there's huge possibility here to really change. Imagine now you're coming from Isla Vista, rather than having the barriers, you suddenly have an extension essentially of Isla Vista into the campus, and the campus and the town really meet each other in a nice way. So this is more akin to Nassau Street at Princeton or the street edge at Chapel Hill for University of North Carolina. So a really changed environment on the west edge of campus. Again, this is looking westward towards Isla Vista. This is the primary entrance to campus on the west side today. It sends a very interesting message, I think. It's 2 lanes of bikes, and the drawbridge can go up at any time. It's not exactly friendly. We propose to take that down. And this would be the changed, you'd still have a bike lane, but instead of having the tunnel, you have a much more integrated street, bicycle, pedestrian environment. And this is also a better, I think, transition from the bike paths of the campus to the bike system in Isla Vista, which we hope we can work on some with the county. And then the new housing that goes along that edge of campus. So this is, studio apartments, townhouses, loft apartments, a real mix of units. Again, we see students, faculty, and staff all living in this housing together. So really a changed image for the west side of our campus. Looking for Isla Vista because we thought, well, what does it feel like from the community if you do this? I mean, we were really worried about the scale from our side, but also from the other side. And this does not incorporate the additional density that's in the master plan. So you're really going to see here the existing condition, existing buildings with our new buildings behind it. If the master plan were built out, and I think there are two options, a 3-story and 4-story option, they become even more compatible. But you can see even in this slide that with the current condition, 2- and 3-story buildings on Part All from Isla Vista, our buildings still feel fairly compatible with that current condition because we step up. We're lower scale at the back and we step up to our condition. We're adding a tower there. We think that these marker elements are very important. They mark the entrance to campus. They tell you there's a university over there, which frankly today that little tunnel doesn't give you a very good message about a major, the institution that we are so proud of isn't really symbolized by the tunnel that we have today. So this is, again, a great change, I think. And then that's what that whole project looks like from the air. Again, you can see the streets in Isla Vista are connected through, if not for vehicles, they're at least connected through for pedestrians and bicycles. We'd like to work very closely with the county to see if that's the right solution. We certainly believe that you could probably open some of the streets for vehicles and it would make a better living condition, especially for our students who frankly are a big part of the population out there. So we see huge potential in terms of that linkage. And then that's the final slide is just an aerial view of the campus showing the whole thing. So we're happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. That was very good, Mr. Fisher. Commissioner Montgomery.
Speed presentation.
Mark, it's good to see you again. You've got a great touch. Are there funds available within the university's budget to do the same kind of renderings for Isla Vista that you've done? Because we really need to start integrating Isla Vista, and I know you feel strongly about that as well.
We've actually done a couple of renderings that we have supplied to the county that were done by the same render, and I think they're actually in the master plan document, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, we have, and I think we did we do 2 in that first round? Again, Jamie's back there. All right. I think we have 2 renderings that we've supplied with 2 different height options too, by the way.
Please.
The second question, and more substantive one, is I've been very much concerned about the jobs housing balance just generally. There was a lot of flurry at the state level years ago, and handbooks were prepared, and really not a lot of follow-through. But it's increasingly obvious that the good news is we have more jobs. The bad news is we have more jobs. How do we address is it a 1-to-1 each new student is a new house or a unit for that resident, for the student, each new faculty? Are you projecting this based upon having a good jobs housing balance? Because if so, it would be a great standard for us to look at throughout the county.
We're still trying to resolve what the exact balance will be. We've looked at everything from thinking about every new student, which is roughly 5,000, to half of all students being housed in campus properties. It's roughly the same number. It turns into about 12,500 beds of student housing total. We have about 7,000, I think, after we build the projects that we're currently underway on. It's probably in the high 6,000 range. So we think that that's one process we go through. We build a lot of student housing. The other is that we would build faculty and staff. And we're trying to get to the right numbers, the right mix. And I believe that we're looking at somewhere around, Gina, correct me, 700 to 1,000 faculty housing units, and then the staff mix will follow that. And if what happens here happens on other campuses, oftentimes you'll set the faculty number fairly high, and they may not take as much of the housing, so the staff will have the option to take some of that housing to backfill. So, but the intent is that everyone would get a piece of the housing, faculty, staff, and students.
And do you take into account also the additional service work that's produced, and where are they housed?
Staff, that would be staff housing, and yes, we do. So the idea would be that we would build faculty, staff, and student housing, and also our recreation facilities grow based on that growth. That all the components you might expect to find in a community develop along with the housing and academic space if we do.
Are the amount of students at the school pretty static? The amount that go out every year, come in every year, or is it an increase or decrease?
I'll let Gene take that one.
Right there, how's that? So we're, under our old long-range development plan, we agreed to a cap on enrollment of 20,000 students, and that's an average fall, winter, spring quarter of the bodies that are on campus, the head count. And we have basically reached that cap about a year, almost 2 years ago, plus or minus 100 students. And so we're fixed there at this point in time. So we basically graduate as many students now as we take in the fall. And that's a
So-
combination of new freshmen and transfer students.
So is that 4,000 or 5,000? Because I know you have a 5-year program in some areas.
It's between 4,000 and 5,000
4,000 or 5,000.
new students that we take in and students that we graduated. So we graduated, I think, close to 4,700 students in commencement last weekend.
I was looking at a article that I brought in from the paper, and it was showing the 3 schools just in the proximity of the 2nd district, and it graduated 1,600 students. So there's 1,600 students that I suspect half of them are going to be leaving home, trying to rent an apartment or something, and they're competing with all your students that are coming in. So if that other is pretty static, there's 800 just from that area looking for apartments in there. So the competition must be very keen.
Yeah, I think competition for housing is keen in the area as a whole,
Yeah.
not just
And
the
it
university
and
associated.
the next year, there's another 1,600, the next year, there's another 1,600. Looks like we're having difficulty keeping up with it. Do you have any major plans for any major, like 5 or 6 story housing for, units for students in the future?
Well, I think Mark has showed you our housing capacity study, and I think the tallest unit we have, Mark, is 4 stories, but nothing, none of the big towers that you have seen in the past. So Francisco Torres was a purchase and not a construction
Oh,
for
I
us.
see, okay.
Right.
All right. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting, if not somewhat superficial, presentation of the whole picture. Now, it's tempting to dive in and start finding out some details, but we probably need to plan more time and do that at some point, particularly as we start looking at Isla Vista more closely. I'd just like to put in a nostalgic plea that if the last of the Army barracks goes down as a UCSB graduate 40 years ago, I'd like to kind of walk around the halls one last time before it goes.
Commissioner Brown. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner
Yeah,
McCovery.
just, did I miss something? I thought, here you're talking about a cap of 20,000 students, but I thought at the outset you said you're going to expand 1% a year, which means 5,000 new students. So you're going to increase the cap to 25,000?
We're working on our long-range development plan now. This is actually all background documents
Right.
that are designed to
Right.
feed into our long-range
Right.
development plan.
Right.
When Gene presented the academic plan earlier,
Right.
we are looking at 25,000
Right.
students as a potential for the
Right.
campus.
Right.
And over the next, between now and November 2007, we'll be in our long-range development planning process. And really, over the course of that year and a half, we have the opportunity to show you in detail what some of these things might mean. That's really where you get into the process of looking at water impacts, sewer impacts, road impacts. We'll study whether this is really self-mitigating. We think that this planning is largely self-mitigating because we're building housing next to jobs, so you shouldn't have to drive as much. You shouldn't have as many cars on the roads. If we were to build the academic program and not build the housing, we would definitely have a different impact on the community. We actually think this is a very positive, sustainable model for future development on the Santa Barbara coastline. So I think there's a lot of very interesting, smart planning in this, and very happily would bring back that detail as we get to it. We've hired a very good firm out of San Luis Obispo to work with us, and I think it's going to be a very exciting process, actually, as we think through what does this mean? What does it mean in terms of trips, bicycles, car trips, bicycle trips, pedestrian trips, water, sewer, gas, everything. And all of that will be part of our planning process. So you're right, this is very sort of 30,000 feet. What's it going to look like, big vision? But then we're going to get down to the level of what does it mean, drop by drop of water if you do this? We'll have a pretty good sense of all of that.
Oh, I appreciate planning and looking that far ahead, and I think it's time for the rest of the county to catch up and take a look, particularly the impacts. Adding 5,000 students plus the number of faculty and staff that relate to an additional 5,000 students is a huge impact on the county. They don't just stay there. They'll drive away and they'll use buses and what have you. And we have other facilities that have an absolute right to expand without permission in terms of Vandenberg, federal prison. And I just think it's time for the county to wake up. This is the most important resource the county has, is UCSB and the businesses it's spawning. And I know you intend to do it in a responsible way and help us wake up the county as a whole to plan for the kind of future that you're planning here.
Thank you. Any other questions, any comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just one comment. I graduated from UCSB not very long ago, obviously. So I don't even remember those buildings because they were basically covered up. That's not true. But I've been participating in planning efforts at UCSB for a long time, and in fact was involved with the 1990 LRDP. And just wanted to let Commissioner Montgomery know that the county, the city of Santa Barbara, and various community organizations took that process very seriously. In fact, probably more seriously than UCSB might have appreciated at the time. It was a pretty rough process, and I think we're well beyond that now. But we intend to be, I think, very involved as a county, and I think there's a focus on this process in the county executive office. So I just wanted to let you know we take it very seriously. We know UCSB is a huge resource and presents some planning challenges that we need to use all of our resources to address.
All right, thank you, Ms. Meester. Any further comments? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Lucas, for your presentation, and hope that at some point you can come in and give us another presentation and a little bit more in depth of what's going on. All right, thank you very much. All right, with that, the Planning Commission. We have one more item.
Mr. Chair, we have item number 4, which is a briefing from the Public Works, Roads, and Transportation
How long will that
Division.
take?
Perhaps you can ask Mr. Demery. I think it's at your commission's request, so.
We can leave now if you want.
No, well, is it a half-hour presentation or?
We can make it as long as you want. You tell us how much time you have, and we'll be flexible.
We could comfortably get through it maybe in 10 to 15 minutes, our actual PowerPoint presentation.
All right, 20-minute presentation would be fine, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Phil Demery. I'm the Public Works Director. I've met some of you before. Some of you I haven't. It's good to meet you. Not knowing exactly what the Planning Commission wanted, my role here is to give Will some time to load the presentation on the computer, and while he's doing that, I'll give you just a thumbnail sketch of our department. We have 5 divisions within Public Works. We have an administrative division. It's a fairly small division, but it comprises our IT folks, payroll personnel, as well as a safety officer position, and also all the accounting functions. We have a surveyor's division. The county surveyor works for Public Works. All the development projects, if it involves recording, goes through the surveyor's office, and so he's very involved in the development review. We do have 3 large operation divisions, that being transportation, then water resources, and resource recovery and waste management. We're going to talk more in depth in transportation, but water resources consists of both our flood control district as well as our water agency and Project Clean Water. Those divisions are funded, or that division is funded wholly by a certain percentage of the 1% property tax that's collected, but primarily in flood control with benefit assessments. Water agency is all the special taxes, and Project Clean Water has a general fund contribution in order to sustain it. We do have a resource recovery and waste management division. That's a division that's responsible for our landfill and 3 transfer stations. The monies that run that division are provided through tip fees and fees collected at the transfer stations, as well as the commodity that's presented through all of our recycling programs. Then we have Transportation Division. Transportation Division is our largest of our operation divisions. And Scott McAlpin's here with me today. He'll give you a few more details. The last thing I wanted to mention to you in terms of size of our department, we have about an $85.5 million budget. It's about $49 million is associated with our operations. The remainder is capital projects. Typically, it's about 50% or so of our budget is capital projects, building things. We have about 340 employees, full-time equivalents in our department. That's about the same number we've had 8 years ago. So we've gone up and down a little bit, but we remain fairly static. That in mind, I'm going to turn that over to Scott now. I think Will's got it all loaded, and both Scott and I are going to stick around and listen to the presentation, be available for any questions.
Thank you, Phil. Mr. Commissioner, Commissioners, as Phil said, my name is Scott McAlpin. I'm the Deputy Director in charge of Transportation. And he mentioned we build things, and we love to build things in transportation. And our responsibilities, we put a slide in here just so you could get a little overview of what we do in transportation. We have approximately 1,667 lane miles of asphalt concrete pavement throughout the county and all 5 supervisorial districts. There's 110 major bridge structures throughout the county, crossing creeks, what have you. 48 traffic signals throughout the county. That number also includes flashing beacons, radar signs that we put up around schools for pedestrian safety, Safe Routes to School programs. We have over 15,000 street trees. These are trees that were planted when development went in throughout the county in the unincorporated areas. And along with that, we have hardscape improvements. And that's actually one of our challenges in the Transportation Division is dealing with the type of trees that they put in next to curb, gutter, and sidewalk in more of our urbanized communities. So we see that a lot. And approximately 4,100 drainage facilities throughout the county of Santa Barbara on the 1,667 lane miles, primarily designed to take water from one side of the road to the other. We're charged with maintaining that. And how we take care of this infrastructure is essentially through 5 sections in the division. You're most familiar with our traffic folks, our traffic safety folks who come and make presentations to your commission. We also have an engineering and design section. We try to do a lot of the public works project design in-house. We maintain a staff of engineers and technicians who are very good at that type of work. And one thing I'd like to add too, as a public agency, a lot of public agencies don't do that. A lot of public agencies go out and they contract all that work. It comes in tremendously handy for us when we have emergency events, because we have technical people on staff who know how to go out and respond to these emergencies that we get. And as you know, we get 100-year events every 3 or 4 years in Santa Barbara County, so it's needed. We have a construction and permit section. They're responsible for actually going out and administering the construction of these projects we design. The permit section also deals with encroachments when people want to build things in the road right away. Our maintenance section is responsible for maintaining the pavements, drainage facilities, what have you, throughout the county. And our accounting section, they pay the bills. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Will to run through our presentation.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you for having us here today for this presentation. My name is Will Robertson. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with Public Works Traffic Section. And earlier today, you had met Brett Stewart, the Traffic Section Manager, on a 65402 determination. We're here today to go through our presentation, Transportation and Land Development, and we'll go ahead and start. I'm going to start off with a real brief history of transportation planning and how transportation planning actually evolved. History has shown us that transportation planning and or land use and transportation have always been closely related. When towns are small and people settle, they find that towns grow and they need more sophisticated modes to get around town. However, as towns are small, most of the people realize that a lot of the land uses were easily accessible by foot. To add to that, populations were dense and the land uses were mixed. So it wasn't uncommon for people to live near, or in some cases, at the primary earner's workplace. Through time, rail and trolley evolved and allowed people to actually live further away from their primary workplace. And along with that, retail and service businesses followed. This led to an expanding economy, and also the increased revenues allowed for more urban expansion. Yes, we all know this is urban sprawl. And again, as the expansion occurred, more services followed, but the primary workplaces still remained in the central city. So people found the need to get to their primary workplace in a more efficient manner. This is where basically the birth of transportation planning started, trying to get these people from their rural environments to their primary workplaces. And of course, without mobility, a community is stifled and growth will not prevail. So what is transportation planning? Now you hear terms like circulation, flow, congestion, arteries. Well, these are all vital functions to the human body, but in transportation, we like to believe that transportation is also essential to society. But more importantly, what is transportation planning? And transportation planning is defined as the area within transportation that deals with the relationship of land use to travel patterns and travel demand, and the planning, evaluation, and programming of those facilities. So here we have listed some elements of transportation planning. Primary areas are traffic safety, traffic congestion, and the mitigation of that congestion. And we gauge the congestion through something called level of service, which you guys are very familiar with. We also create area transportation improvement plans, and those plans are funded with traffic mitigation fees. Transportation demand management is sometimes something that we will encourage developers to do to also mitigate traffic congestion. And then we also have standard county roadway improvements. And in the white box here, I thought it would be good to add the transportation land use cycle, and how essentially transportation planning is broken into two critical areas. We have traffic engineering and then the land use planning aspect of it. And this slide is great because it shows how land use planning and traffic engineering affect the overall land use cycle, starting with basically no congestion on the roadways, leads to land further away from areas being accessible. Of course, people move there and land prices rise. And that's where farmers see the need, because of the rising land prices, to actually rezone their land to either residential or commercial. Of course, this leads to political pressure and rezoning, and once that happens, subdivisions are built on the outskirts of the town. This brings in more residents, and now shoppers are traveling further into town, which causes, of course, congestion. People require wider roads because they're tired of waiting to get into town, and the road is widened. That's when the process starts all over again. So this is a fundamental and very critical process. So let's talk a little bit about traffic safety and what are the things we look at when we're reviewing a development plan for traffic safety. The first thing we always look at is access and circulation elements, which would include site distance, number of access points, the internal circulation in the parking required for that development. Critical issue is the driveway throat length and the queuing caused by that development. Is there a need for acceleration or deceleration lanes? Is there a need for raised median or some form of channelization? And can we encourage the developer to incorporate pedestrian, bicycle, and perhaps transit operations to the site? Another critical area we look at is basically local area safety problems. Are the roads currently experiencing a large number of accidents, or do we anticipate, because of the development, that accident rates will increase? we use a number of reference tools when we review a development plan or project, may I say. Probably the most important out of all of them in both transportation planning and in the traffic engineering aspect would be the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, what we call the AASHTO book. And it's a policy of recommended guidelines on geometric design standards for roads or highways and streets. Another reference tool that we use quite often is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which we also call the MUTCD. My most important reference tool in reviewing projects would be the Institute of Traffic Engineers, or ITE, Trip Generation Manual. This is the publication where I look to a set of basically data, national data, that gives me trip generation habits for individual land uses. Another item is the Highway Capacity Manual, and that tends to be more of a reference manual for Caltrans facilities, but it is still used by a lot of local jurisdictions. A lot of times when we're reviewing projects, we would go to area transportation improvement plans to see what type of improvements may be needed as development expands throughout a community. Currently, we have what we call the GTIP, the Goleta Transportation Improvement Plan, and the OTIP, and both of those are for build-out scenarios of the communities. The department in the future may take on the development of the Lompoc-Vandenberg Transportation Improvement Plan, perhaps the San Ynez Transportation Improvement Plan, and there is talk of a First District Transportation Improvement Plan as well. Also, the county every year looks at, well, it's a 5-year plan, the Capital Improvement Plan, large projects that need to be funded by the county, and excuse me there. And we also look at developments to see what their impact would be on these facilities that are mentioned in the CIP. Is that it? No. Oh, there we go. Okay. Probably the most common condition in a condition letter on a project would be the need for the developer to pay his traffic mitigation fees. Currently, the Goleta transportation fee for a single home is $11,305. In the Orchid area, that's $2,833, and in the Santa Barbara, Montecito, Summerlin areas, $1,663. All the other areas of the county pay $448 per single family home. Your first question would be, well, why are these fees so high for the Goleta area as compared to the Orchid, Santa Barbara, or other areas? And the simple answer to that question would be that the transportation projects needed to, the infrastructure projects needed to keep the area functioning are a lot greater in the Goleta area than they are in the other areas. We review this when we review each tip, and over time, these fees may drop or they may increase. We also offer an off-site improvement credit if a developer comes in and they're willing to do improvements that are not necessarily along their frontage or along their frontage but exceed the standard curb, gutter, sidewalk, or 18 feet of pavement that we normally require. We can enter into a reimbursement agreement with that developer, or if the fee is less than their transportation impact fee, then we can just do a straight credit to their impact fees. This was done on the Orchid Apartments project where we were missing a segment of sidewalk to connect to the park, and we offered the developer credit towards his fees in order to build that missing segment of sidewalk. So what are our recommended standard roadway improvements? Right-of-way dedication is common. Sidewalk or decomposed granite paths are another recommended improvement. Curb, gutter, drainage improvements. Sometimes a development will have an existing driveway that may not be adequate to handle the proposed development. We will recommend that that driveway be upgraded to handle that. Site distance obstructions are common. A lot of times there may be an overgrown shrub or a tree in the way that actually blocks the ability for a car coming out of the driveway to see safely and perform a maneuver. So we would have those site distance obstructions removed. And I'd just like to note that all public works conditions are recommendations to the Planning Commission. You do have discretion in whether or not you want to accept those. Transportation demand management is something we encourage developers to include in their plans. They include carpooling, bicycle facilities, food courts, childcare, van pooling, and there are TDM incentives. Public Works also funds a position for the alternative transportation manager who actively pursues these type of TDM measures throughout the county. Probably one that's big right now is the Breeze bus that was in, the Breeze bus up in North County is up and running, and that allows shuttle service between Lompoc and the Santa Maria area and Vandenberg. Another area we dive into, of course, is CEQA analysis, and once all our recommended conditions and kind of a brief overview of any development is brought forward, we consult with the applicant through subdivision review committee, and then if planning and development feels it's necessary, we go through some kind of CEQA analysis. Why do we evaluate traffic effects? Primarily to see if there's a change in the roadway or intersection functions. We want to identify and improve any existing or project-caused safety problems. We want to provide for informed decision making, and we want to identify appropriate project-related transportation improvements. We measure those effects through level of service analysis. Currently our standard is the ICU methodology, but you could also use highway capacity manual, as mentioned earlier. We look at roadway volumes, signal warrants. Almost every project goes through a site distance study immediately prior to subdivision review committee. And planning and development holds the CEQA threshold guidelines, which we apply to each project, as well as the CERC element standards. And then through SBCAG, we have a congestion management program that we also look to see if there are any impacts to intersections identified in that program. So when do we really need a traffic study? Generally, I would require a traffic study if there's greater than 50 peak hour trips, but that's just a guideline. Sometimes if the intersections are operating at exceptionally well levels of service, that may not be required. Doesn't mean that we don't look at it, but not all projects require traffic studies, and in that case, we probably would do the analysis in-house. We also would identify roadways and intersections that are operating at LOSC or worse. We would gauge safety issues, and if there are any blatant safety issues around a given project, then we would want to do a traffic study to address those. And we would also need a traffic study if there is an inconsistency with the CERC element or if a significant impact was identified. How do we determine whether a project is consistent with the CERC element? We evaluate different point in time scenarios. There would be the existing setting, existing plus approved, full cumulative, which is existing, approved, and pending projects. And then we would also look at plan build out. This is also a set of guidelines. Not all projects may require plan build out or full cumulative analysis, but if we go through a CEQA analysis, I guarantee at least one of these is looked at. What are the county CEQA thresholds? There is an existing setting scenario threshold that basically reviews the allowable addition of project traffic to given intersections. And the allowable traffic is dependent on the level of service of that intersection. Full cumulative scenario, significant impact would be a substantial change in the volume to capacity ratio at intersections when they degrade to LOSD or worse. And then sometimes we look at 10 or 15-year projections for consistency there with community plan. Other things that are identified in the CEQA thresholds, there is a safety threshold, basically talks about existing accident history and the potential for future accidents. And there are roadway capacity numbers that we check to make sure that they don't exceed. Identifying and evaluating mitigation measures. When we apply a mitigation measure, it must be feasible. It must be linked to the project impact or to the circ element inconsistency. And the analysis must identify any residual impacts. Also worth noting is payment of fees is not considered a project-specific mitigation measure, but it can be considered as cumulative mitigation for the project. What are some other policies that we look at? We look at community plans, transportation improvement plans. We look to planning and development and encourage provisions for alternative transportation on all projects. We also look to guide them to put in road improvements such as bike paths, pedestrian walkways, bus pockets, and other site design enhancements. And that concludes our presentation. We thank you for your time, and we're available for questions.
Commissioner Boyson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was a little surprised by the statistic to 48 traffic signals throughout the county. I didn't realize that all of them were in the Orchid area. But I say that a little bit facetiously, but we do seem to have this attitude that if a developer offers a traffic light, we're going to put it in. You know, whether it's necessarily needed or not. And you know, then all of a sudden we get these traffic lights. But my real question had to do with roundabouts. I know the county has been reluctant to really take a look at roundabouts. We've had tremendous success up in the city of Santa Maria with roundabouts there in the Bradley Square area and that sort of thing. And I just wanted to see what your thoughts were and if that's something on our radar.
I'll take a crack at this. First of all, in terms of the signals, we don't necessarily like the fact that we have to put a lot of traffic signals in either because they're very expensive. You know, I think it's about $250,000 for a traffic signal. They're very costly type of solution. Unfortunately, we get a lot of pressures sometimes. It's, you know, when a developer comes in and you know, they want to get projects approved. You'll have a lot of people come in the neighborhood and say, you know, it's going to totally affect our area. Our kids aren't going to be able to walk to school. We're not going to be able to ride our bike. You need a signal in there so we can cross the street. So the developer a lot of times feels under the gun and pressured to provide some sort of mechanism to get some get more positive feedback from the community instead of all the negativity. And we work with a developer and we try to assist, but that's one of the reasons why you see a lot more traffic signals with new development, especially in an area like Orchid that's ready to grow significantly. On the issue of roundabouts, we have ventured out into roundabouts. We don't have any actually on the ground, and unfortunately the roundabout scenarios that we've been involved with in recent time has been very complicated roundabouts on Highway 217 and on El Colegio with the university, and they were chained roundabouts with a lot of traffic, and so that's an area where, unfortunately, we would have liked to have seen that maybe move forward and be placed on the ground, but that nevertheless hasn't been done. In terms of as a development, you know, we're open to it. You know, we just don't have a lot of history here in the county government of having roundabouts. I know City of Santa Barbara has, I know City of Santa Maria has, and we've been monitoring that and looking at those scenarios. And so I think that the time has come, and we'll be open-minded about that.
Good, thank you.
Commissioner Montgomery.
I was interested in the presentation to learn for the first time, my problem, not yours, that you can require mitigation fees, but all the other mitigation suggestions are discretionary, whether under CEQA or what have you. I had not been aware of that.
Right. That's something that's very important for your commission to understand, as well as the Board of Supervisors. Our conditions are recommendations. Right. And that's and oftentimes the case, and you know, in the history has shown us, I've been in my position since 1994 as Public Works Director. Prior to that, I was in flood control, and I served on the subdivision review committee, and I came to planning commission meetings all the time. It was with a great deal of regularity that commissioners would take conditions and feel that in the overall perspective of that development, that maybe a condition that Public Works is as recommended would not be appropriate. And I think that's perfectly fine. That's very accepting, because after all, you're having to weigh the benefits of the entire project against the recommendations. And I know there have been situations in the past in which you've reviewed conditions that maybe it appears that our conditions are a little onerous. And I think that's totally your discretion as to whether or not that you want to place that as a final condition on the project.
Well, let me, if you will, Mr. Chairman, follow up. It's my own responsibility to understand what the interrelationships were and are. I got a terrible taste in my mouth when we were doing the Shelley training stables. I felt that there was advocacy that had crossed the line and was criticized, and actually my conduct in a private conversation with your staffers was complained to the CEO. And in the context of being fair, you have done a tremendous job in this department. The way you and your staff responded a year ago to the terrible floods was incredible, and I have nothing but the highest regard for you and Scott, and I've watched you in action, and you're to be applauded. But this is the era of customer service,
right,
and I think we can all do a little bit better in making certain. I appreciate your statement. That's exactly the way it should be, and we should do our bit to improve the understanding on the part of applicants as to where the line is. And I'm not saying that the suggestions that were made at Shelley were incorrect. It was the impression that I was left with, and others, that these were somehow absolute standards that had to be met. So all due respect, I would hope that the new approach within P&D of getting sort of conceptual review at the outset, so all these issues are anticipated, will avoid 99% of this.
Right.
And I know from watching you and your reputation that you'll deliver on your promises.
Well, thank you very much. Did you want to say something, Diane?
Commissioner Brown.
Well, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make one clarification, and that is if department condition is also included as a mitigation measure because it results from the environmental documentation process, then obviously the commission has a different burden than just balancing among a variety of project needs, but in fact has a duty under CEQA to find that a mitigation's infeasible or some other thing. But by and large, I think Mr. Demery's correct that the departments make, I think, very reasoned professional recommendations to your commission, but it's up to your commission as to how you incorporate those.
And I think, Diane, tell me if I'm speaking incorrectly, but I believe in the Shelley project that was a mitigation written into the ND, which became a little bit more problematic. But there again, then you have the ability to make findings regarding the project, weighing the larger project. So you have discretion, and never forget that. That's very important as part of your decision-making tool. One thing I want to mention that I'm kind of excited about in terms of public service, what we're contemplating right now in Public Works is, you may know, a developer comes in and the developer has an agent, a surveyor, an architect, and an engineer, and they're all involved in projects, and it's very costly. And the problem is, so the developer or the owner has all these people working for him, and he deals with our flood control district and plan checking after getting approval from you folks. Then he produces plans, gives it to flood control for review, he gives it to traffic to review, he gives it to surveyor for review, he's given it out to our construction people for review. He's dealing with 5 or 6 different people in Public Works, not to mention fire, environmental health, and all these others. And they get lost, they have no idea. And it's complicated because oftentimes their engineer, their agent, their surveyor isn't giving them the real information either. So they're totally lost. They don't even know who to turn to. And it's a very complicated process. And those are the experienced folks. Now with the mom and pops, they just totally get lost in the maze. So what we're going to do in Public Works is we want to create an ombudsman. This is a single point of contact where a developer comes in, they give this person a call, and this person we have on our staff is the one that's doing all the legwork, running around, finding out where their project is, and they're giving them updates, and they'll have the database, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be interacting. So they don't have to worry about making 10 different contacts.
Wouldn't a checklist and a PERT chart do that?
Yeah, but here's the thing. A lot of people like the one-on-one contact. They like that personal contact. We have most of our forms are web friendly, everything else, and you have the interaction. You'd be really surprised. A lot of people, they see a check or it's not checked, but they want to know why. Why isn't it? Where is it? They want the voice. We're seeing that more and more.
Commissioner Brown has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Demery, thank you. You're talking about mom and pop. I just wanted to thank you and your staff, with whom I've worked both as a community activist and now as a planning commissioner, for their accessibility and openness, responsiveness, get emails back when I send them, I get phone calls back. It's just been really great, and I appreciate that. And I know that the community sometimes has to wind their way to get answers, so having an ombudsman will be very helpful. I have a couple questions just about some specific second district items, and one pertains to the GTIP update, which I think we've been waiting for, and I just wondered when that might happen, if it's going to be in the near future, or perhaps Mr.
Well, here's what's happened, is that we had actually completed a good portion of our work in Public Works on the GTIP.
Okay.
What has gotten, unfortunately, embroiled in this, I think, in the second district is some of the affordable housing issues.
Okay.
And so we need to kind of conclude with where we want to be as a county on affordable housing in order for P&D to have accurate projections of population density, so we can crank into the model.
Okay. And then, so that, I guess, would follow. My question is, when were the last time that the traffic fees for Goleta were updated? It's been quite a while, hasn't it?
It has.
And that's
Mr. Chair, it has been since the last community plan update, except for the yearly cost increase, the Caltrans cost. To add to what Phil said, though, we'll be working with the Goleta Visioning Committee.
Okay.
As you remember, Scott and I were at that and gave a short presentation. And so as these housing and land use issues are worked out, we're well prepared to continue on with that GTIP.
Do each of your commissioners know how a TIP is formed? Have you gone through that exercise? It's really pretty simple. Just take me a minute to explain. Through a community planning process that involves members of the community, they kind of decide on on what areas that they think need to be rezoned or stayed currently zoned. And that is kind of a visioning type of plan. Based upon that, they also asked for community ideas on what level of service would be appropriate for that community. And in most of our tips, we're seeing as a level of service B. Well, level of service B for us, then we can superimpose that into the population densities based upon that zoning over a certain planning horizon, as we stated in the slides. I think OTIP is 10 years, GTIP's 15 years. So over the planning horizon with the given zoning and with a level of service B, this is what the infrastructure requirements will be. Now you know the infrastructure requirements, you put the dollar tag at that time, what that's going to cost, and then it's just merely mathematics. You make the division by the number of, or the population and projected trips, and then that is how you come up with a tip. So the planning horizon can lengthen if you want to reduce the cost. Some of the zoning issues can be changed if you want to lower the cost. So when our staff and others come to you in the future on a tip, the questions to ask, if you don't think the fee is appropriate, you can start asking questions about planning horizons and zoning and so forth.
Commissioner
'cause
Brown
it
has
affects
another
the price.
question.
Thank you, and this is just sort of a housekeeping item, but when I'm writing on Cathedral Oaks and in Hollister, I see that the medians need maintenance, and I know the community talks about that and kind of gives the county a black eye because they're not really maintained on a regular basis, and I believe that's your department that's responsible for that.
Hey, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, we've had our hands full this year after the rains and the weed abatement and the maintenance, and we're on it. We have a contract with that. And one other thing, if I could add to what Phil was saying too, when we develop our fees, we've been very successful at getting state and federal grants in the past, and we build that in too to reduce the amount of the fee that has to be paid.
Commissioner Boyson, you had a question.
Well, I was just going to, as far as the ombudsman, I know that in the past when I've processed maps, most developers, at least in the North County, we had always designated Mr. Stewart as that ombudsman. So, but it's good to see that you're going to formally identify someone. But I do remember if we ever did have a question as we went through the process, who's responsible, we would always go to Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. Commissioner Montgomery.
And I'd like to volunteer that retired planning commissioners could serve as ombudsman without pay or travel expense. I have a question for Scott. Scott, what, if anything, is ever going to happen with the Gaviota Bridge?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Montgomery, we were at the California Coastal Commission last week up in Santa Rosa. They heard their staff report on, their staff was recommending that there was a substantial issue with the Gaviota Beach Road Bridge. Their commission found that there was a substantial issue, and now we are, I believe, tentatively scheduled for August in San Pedro to have a hearing on that, a de novo hearing. So that's really the next step for us. So we're working with their staff to complete our application. We're also working with Congresswoman Capps' office, the EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers to look at enhancements we can make to the preferred project to allow the wetlands downstream to survive. So.
Commissioner Cooney.
Just a couple of quick comments. First, in the area of the 1st District in which I live, it's very flood prone, as you know, and I just want to comment that particularly with last year's floods, the amount of time and energy that was thrown into not only making the roads passable, but actually going the next step and bringing them up so that there won't be as much a threat in future floods was, I thought, well beyond what the expectations of the community was. And that was, as Scott mentioned, an effort to grab some emergency road repair funding when it was available. And you've obviously become adept at doing that. It's just terrific for residents. I don't think it gets mentioned enough how much alertness there is. So repairs are not only made, but planning for the future is done at the same time. That's really terrific. And almost more important, belated congratulations for a great Santa Ynez High School
girls' basketball season.
Oh, thank you to both. We just received a NACO award, a NACO Achievement Award for the emergency response, particularly at Old San Marcos. So we'll be accepting that award back in Chicago in August. Yeah.
Mr. Demery, seems like the 4 of the 5 districts want to take you up to sainthood, but I'm going to hold up the beatification of that.
Okay.
In 1968, there was a major flood. You've heard me say that before, and McLaughlin Bridge was washed out. Since 1968, we haven't had a crossing there. Do you ever work with the CBs to see if they would like a training exercise? They at one point put a Bailey Bridge type over one of the bridges that blew out in that area on the San Ynez, and we could we need a crossing there, and it seems to be ignored continually over and over and over. Now, I know there's a plan to do something 40 years from now, but in the meantime, we need a crossing there. The crossing at Central Avenue and D Street, I'm sure, is approaching a level D in terms of traffic congestion, and opening up McLaughlin would certainly relieve the traffic in that area. Would you like to comment?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I know it's an issue. In fact, we've talked about it prior. In 1969 is some of the worst flooding we've ever had in our county, particularly in the North County along the San Ynez River. And we've actually put several temporary crossings across McLaughlin in the past. And unfortunately, they're only temporary because they get washed out. Now, you might ask yourself, well, here, Public Works, they just said they're into building things. Why do they build things that just get washed away? That doesn't make any sense. Well, the problem is, on the regulatory end, because we have to deal with a bunch of different resource agencies today when we put a crossing in a river, you can't put concrete, you can't put asphalt, you can't put the types of things that would be permanent without a very, very long planning effort. And so we're would be more than happy to go through a very, very long planning effort, but we want some regional partners. So we have on several occasions met with the city of Lompoc, and recently, I think it was about 5 months ago, we sat down with the mayor of the city of Lompoc, Supervisor Gray, as well as public works staff from the city, and said, okay, are you there? Are you with us? Do you want to do this? Our question was, do we do this, or do you want to do central? Do you want to do both? And these are the costs, because this can be a very costly, this long-term solution. And they, quite frankly, they weren't interested in McLaughlin. They wanted to put all their eggs in one basket on Central. So that's kind of the direction.
So Central is about 20 years away from getting done.
Well, unfortunately, what happens is that we could try to do another temporary at McLaughlin. And what I mean temporary is we can just put dirt and culverts in. The last time we did it didn't even last a winter. And so it's $30,000 that gets washed away every time we do it. Love to go in there to do it right. It's easy to do it right. It doesn't cost that much more to do it right. There's no way the resource agencies would allow that done. So what we have to do is elevate with piers, big environmental document, big lead time, very expensive project.
Again, let me go back to this. The CBs from time to time have construction jobs that they do in different areas for training purposes. This would be, and now they did it once and it fell, and they did it again. That was on the crossing on 13th Street.
Okay.
Do you recall that?
I don't.
Well, when the flood came in, they put a crossing in and the crossing
69.
didn't hold, it fell. And so they came back and did it again. These were Bailey Bridge type things, you know. It was a training exercise for them. Again, I say to you that, you know, the Construction Battalion Center is here at Port Hueneme. And I'm sure from time to time you read about them doing construction jobs and certain types of things. It could possibly, there's a possibility of having a joint venture there by them doing one of these, and it doesn't have to be a type of bridge that is gonna hold large trucks or anything. I mean, it could just be for automobiles, period.
Well, Chair Valencia, as a personal favor, I will make contact with the CVs and
And
see
I
if they'd be
appreciate
willing
that.
to do that.
And I'm concerned with why this was being discussed with the mayor of the city of Lompoc and where there wasn't a public hearing in the county, because this is a county-type project, not a city project. That would be a courtesy to them, but I would think in the county, it's more important to the people of the 4th District who live outside the city limits than somebody inside the city limits.
Chairman Valencia, the problem is you're looking at probably a $10 million solution in order to get through the resource agencies. That's $10 million we don't have.
Well,
So the city of Lompoc is a potential revenue source if they'd be interested, even on a temporary basis, whether or not they'd be interested.
The
to
city of
help fund.
Lompoc can't get a swimming pool built correctly, so, you know. You know, I think that 30-some years, the people of Mesa Oaks and Vandenberg Village and Mission Hills deserve better treatment than that. And with that, I'll leave it. You said you'll look into it.
I will.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that's more than others have done.